Good morning. This is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land Commissioners. This morning, the board was in executive session to discuss the application for water rights, which is noticed on the board's agenda, and receive advice regarding the upcoming trial this summer from its attorneys. The matters discussed were limited to attorney-client communication and no decisions reached in executive session. The board is now out of executive session and ready to proceed with its regularly noticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. We will move forward. As Ed noted, we did have a prior executive session. We have 4 commissioners here in person in Denver, with Commissioner Frobe joining us via Zoom. So we will, I do want to note that while we did receive 1 public comment via email, it is related to an agenda item that we will be discussing later. So with that, let's see, where are we at? All right.
Public comment.
We need regular public comment. Thank you.
Folks listening along online, if you'd like to address the commissioners with comments about a topic that is not on our agenda today, please use the raise hand feature in your Zoom viewer. We'll bring you forward to be able to address the commissioners. And as a reminder, that transition usually takes 20 to 30 seconds to complete.
Okay.
So I don't see any raised hands, Commissioner.
Okay, let's move forward with announcements.
Tim,
You're first.
yeah, sorry, I have no announcements.
Okay. now we'll-
Everything I have to say is in the staff report.
Thank you.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Tim Brass, and I serve as DNR's Assistant Director for Parks, Wildlife, and Lands. DNR staff are currently busy with the legislature in full swing. We're happy to report that all of DNR's priority bills now been introduced, and staff have been working hard to move those bills forward while also responding to quite a few others. This past fall, DNR gathered for a strategic planning retreat through which we outlined priorities for the department for the next 3 years. I'd like to briefly recap these priorities, which include advancing biodiversity conservation measures in the state, planning for a coordinated and strategic transition to zero emission energy while avoiding, minimizing, and mitigating the impacts on species and habitats, building a tribal engagement and relations program to improve coordination with tribes across departments, balancing conservation and recreation, improving climate resiliency. These are big issues to tackle, and we recognize that the State Land Board is already working to address several of these priorities by facilitating renewable energy development on state trust lands, coordinating with the tribes, making decisions, and pursuing new investments which improve fish and wildlife habitat for a variety of species on state trust lands. A couple of quick staffing updates. We're excited to announce that we've hired Lacey Gentry as DNR's new federal affairs analyst. Lacey comes to DNR with experience working in the water section for CPW and working to prepare federal comments in collaboration with other DNR departments. We're currently in the process of interviewing candidates for a new policy director position, which will be overseeing the implementation of DNR's policy priorities mentioned earlier. DNR has recently hired Aaron Sidoko to serve as the Assistant Director for Research with the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. She comes to DNR from the School of Mines. Bear with me, I have a fairly lengthy update on legislative items. But to start, just wanted to give a quick update on DNR's priority bills. We are continuing to work on a bill that would give CPW the authority to conduct investigations and surveys of native invertebrates and rare plants. The bill would give the agency the tools needed to manage and conserve wildlife in a more comprehensive way. This bill is House Bill 1117, and it recently passed second reading in the House. It includes several amendments which clarified that any management and conservation programs that are undertaken by the agency would be voluntary only. This is based on several stakeholder concerns that we had received. We are also working to advance Senate Bill 17, which is the Wolverine reintroduction bill. This will give CPW the authority to reintroduce wolverines into the state. And it was recently introduced with strong bipartisan support and sponsorship. Notably, the bill includes a requirement that 10J non-essential experimental population designation be put in place before a reintroduction of wolverines can occur in Colorado. That 10J designation will help ensure management flexibility and will also help limit potential land use restrictions on key stakeholders. Another piece of legislation that we are tracking is the extension of the Wild Horse Working Group. In 2023, the legislature passed a bipartisan bill, which was Senate Bill 275. They created a new Wild Horse Working Group, which is charged with developing recommendations for the legislature on actions that can be taken to more sustainably manage horse populations in the state through improved control. The Department of Agriculture is leading this bill, and both DNR and the State Land Board have seats on the Wild Horse Working Group. The State Land Board seat is held by Abe Medina, and we appreciate his ongoing engagement in both the working group and the committee meeting. Moving on to a couple of energy bills. ECMC is pursuing legislation this session to clarify its authority over carbon sequestration projects. The main components of this bill are to establish in state law that pore space for the purposes of carbon sequestration is owned by the surface owner if that pore space has not been severed. The second component is to create a process to utilize pore space to facilitate large sequestration projects. We appreciate State Land Board staff in providing comments and reviewing early drafts of the ECMC legislation, and we believe the introduced version protects the Land Board's interests and will also help facilitate the Land Board's continued work on carbon sequestration. DNR continues working with the Colorado Energy Office on a bill to streamline and standardize the siting of renewable energy projects in Colorado. There's interest in a bill which will help define the state's role in renewable siting, while also protecting wildlife resources and maintaining county siting authority. This bill has not yet been introduced. CEO continues to work with a wide range of stakeholders to find some consensus on that bill. I also wanted to bring attention to Senate Bill 24. This will give local authorities the ability to enforce and assess fines on landowners for non-compliance with noxious weed management plans within their jurisdictions. This bill is headed to the governor's desk, and at the request of DNR, it includes an amendment which will exempt state agencies from civil penalties. DNR has also been engaged in House Bill 24, which will give local authorities the ability to regulate pesticides. Amendments were included within that bill to make state-owned and managed waters and lands exempt, which helped resolve some of DNR's earlier concerns. There's a series of oil and gas bills that we are actively tracking, which could have impacts on future land board.
Just a little one. Yeah.
Future land board operations. First, Senate Bill 159 would put new limits on permits for oil and gas after 2030. This bill is expected to have its first hearing this week. And while we recognize there's been significant community concerns, we do not expect the bill to pass out of committee. House Bill 1330 Would also update CDPHE's permitting process by requiring new permits for oil and gas operators prior to going to ECMC. We're currently evaluating this bill and working to find a good path forward on it. The Senate Bill 165 is a pretty broad bill that you may have heard about. Deals with ozone reductions. This bill will put new limits on oil and gas development, pre-production activities within the ozone non-attainment zone during the ozone action season. And that's all I had on state legislation. Moving on to federal affairs, we're currently in the process of putting together comments on BLM's solar PEIS, which will help guide solar development projects on BLM lands for years to come. A few water updates. On March 5th, Upper Colorado Division states submitted their proposed alternative for post-2026 operations in Lake Powell and Lake Mead to the Bureau of Reclamation, excuse me. The lower basin states, including Arizona, California, and Nevada, they submitted a conflicting proposal shortly thereafter. We believe the Upper Division states alternative is responsive to the hydrologic conditions and rebuilds storage reservoirs, and it protects water users and resources. One other quick water update. Nebraska continues to pursue construction of the Perkins County Canal near Ovid, Colorado. But many questions remain regarding the scope of that, the design, permitting implications, etc. The DNR and AG team have been working closely to understand the implications for Colorado's water users. And we're currently working on strategies to protect Colorado's water users while also preserving our state's commitment to the South Platte Compact. A few other energy updates. The state's updated greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap was recently released, and it includes 49 near-term actions intended to help the state meet its statutory greenhouse gas reduction targets. The roadmap includes direction to the state land board to expand renewable energy generation on state lands. We look forward to working with state land board staff to explore opportunities to continue to lease state lands for renewable energy development, while also protecting important agricultural, wildlife, and other values. A few tribal updates. Ute Mountain Ute tribal leadership is very interested in reobtaining leases to state land board trust lands that have been held for many years prior to the recent lease decision. This is at the tribe's Adams Ranch and also the Hay Gulch Ranch located in the southwest. The tentative date for the next quarterly DNR and Southern Ute Indian tribe leadership meeting is April 4th. The first of these leadership meetings was held in October and it was very successful. Moving forward, Chairman Baker has requested that quarterly meetings be held between tribal and DNR leadership to support ongoing collaboration and ensure good information sharing with our tribal partners. Lastly, a few CPW updates. Colorado Parks and Wildlife is hosting its Partners in the Outdoors Conference, April 15th through the 17th in Breckenridge. This event was just recently announced and the tickets have already sold out. But if folks are interested in attending, there is a wait list available. And then just this week, 2 new Parks and Wildlife commissioners were confirmed by the Senate on Tuesday. Both Jess and Jack Murphy will be serving as representatives of the outdoor recreation and parks utilization seats. So that concludes my remarks, and happy to pass anything along to the DNR team or answer any questions you all may have.
So this is probably more for Bill. Which of the properties that we have were Native American leases? Who's our leases on?
So we had three individual leases for grazing, either a section or smaller, down in Southwest Colorado. We attempted to renew those. I'm going to look to Aaron to make sure I get the facts right, but we attempted to renew those leases, and the tribes didn't want to sign our lease form, and so those leases expired by their terms a couple years ago. We've attempted, our AG has attempted to work with the tribes to find more acceptable lease language, but effectively it boils down to who they are asserting their rights as a sovereign nation and saying any dispute should take place in their courts under their terms. There are places where that is probably appropriate and doable. In this instance, it's sort of a landlord-tenant relationship. So, for example, if they didn't pay, where should that trial be heard? Or what law should apply on that? And so we still have not resolved that issue. Aaron O'Connell is just recently still engaged with the tribes there. And so we're going to try and get 2 of those 3 leases out to market again, just so we have producers on the land. The third one was recently leased to the mining operation that already was doing work on the surface. So that's the backstory to those. It's a difference of opinion on the contract form.
And so, Tim, and what you've listed as one of your objectives, how does that fit with what Director Ryan just said?
Yeah, I think, as Director Ryan said, I think it's kind of an ongoing conversation, and, we were able to hire a new tribal liaison here at DNR to help facilitate conversations like these. And so I just want to offer Stacey Coleman as a resource who I know has been in coordination on some of these issues, but.
Commissioner Hayes, I just want to make sure you understand that Tim was talking about DNR's goals broadly around tribal engagement. And as you might imagine, those are really deep around water, around fire, around wildlife. So it's a much broader goal for the Department of Natural Resources than just the land board. We have very limited overlap with the 2 tribes. There are, we do play a role with regard to just the leases. So the land board's role within that goal is very limited. This is a much broader engagement effort around water rights, around wildfire, around shared resources at the state and tribal level for all things natural resource. So not just us.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess with regards to those priority areas, we're sort of in the process of having individual conversations with each of the respective departments to outline where there's good interface on each of those priority areas. So yeah, it will be a all hands on deck for each of those.
See you next. Next, Tim.
All right, we are going to move on to business before the board. First up will be Mindy and Mark. Welcome.
Hey, Mark.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mindy Godsagan, Conservation Services Manager with the State Land Board, and I'm here really just to introduce Mark Lovell. I work closely with Mark through our interagency agreement with the Colorado State Forest Service. So I'm the main liaison for the State Forest Service, and Mark is the main liaison to us. So, anyway, Mark,
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to speak to you this morning about our partnership, State Forest Service and the State Land Board, as well as new and exciting partnerships that are ongoing and in the works with involving state lands, state trust lands, and Colorado State Forest Service. As Mindy said, I'm Mark Lovell. I am the forestry program specialist. I'm still fairly new at this, so I think about my title was, but really what that is to coordinate the planning of forest treatments. And our field offices statewide, so, yeah, so that's who I am, what I'm doing, and, yeah. Let me see if I can get this to advance. There we go. So just a brief background of our partnership between State Land Board and Colorado State Forest Service. Initially, the first agreement was signed in 1967 between the State Land Board and the State Forest Service. And I found this old archived photograph of, I think it's up at the State Forest, and that's Henry Jones, who was a State Land Board forester around that time. And that sign shows and indicates that partnership between the State Forest Service and the State Land Board. Our current agreement was signed in May 2017 and goes through 2037. And the main emphasis as far as Colorado State Forest Service is the forest resource is to emphasize the management of the forest resource and to enhance the health of forests, such as forest, the photograph on the left shows a thinned lodgepole stand, a young stand. So we want to enhance the forest health and also reduce risks from fire, insects, and disease. And where appropriate and applicable, also yield forest products, such as the posts and poles that are on that truck and the photograph on the right. So to some extent, I know we're all aware of the increasing threats to our forest resources. Just one example here is the spruce beetle. That's been impacting our high elevation spruce fir forest since 2000. It's somewhat subsiding now, mainly because a lot of the type of forests that it desires have been already impacted. So, but even though we don't have the acres impacted by the beetle as much anymore, those accumulated dead fuels in the forest are still going to cause us a lot of risks for fire and other hazards. So, and just for an example, this type of forest, the spruce fir forest, is that high elevation forest where we gain a lot of water from. So these are really important impacts and potentially harmful impacts to water. The mountain pine beetle from the mid 2000s, millions of acres impacted as well. And the same thing, we don't see large areas and large pockets of epidemics with the mountain pine beetle currently, but the impacts are still out there on the forests. And this is a photograph of a lodgepole forest, just showing the amount of dead fuel that are still in these forests and will continue to impact us. Of course, one of the impacts of beetle infestations is the large forest fires that have resulted. We can see average by decade, the large increase from the 2000s, 2010s, showing a little bit of a decrease in the 2020s, but of course we're not through the decade yet. And we have had a couple of recent years where we've had some lower fires mounts in the last couple of years. But of course, 2020 was a huge year. 3 of our biggest fires by acreage occurred in 2020. And then 4 of the largest 5 fires occurred in the last 5 to 6 years. The outlier there.
Oh, I was just asking, I mean, what do you attribute the less fires those previous decades? Better, different management, more harvesting?
A lot of the earlier, I think some of that is just the lack of fire, or that there was fire suppression and the effects of that fire suppression through those earlier decades. Kind of, I mean, that's a good part of that is that the density in the forest increased up through the 80s and 90s, in the 2000s, and we're starting to see some of those effects. So we had higher densities of trees in our forests. Yeah, some of that could have been harvesting earlier, the amount of harvesting that was being done in some of those. But then as say fire suppression through those years. The density of the forest has gone up, and then we started definitely seeing some of these insect outbreaks. That were really starting to accumulate dead material. I mean, of course, there's drought, other effects too, so all of these things kind of all affect each other as well. So, yeah, like I said, the outlier here would be the Hammond fire, west of Denver. But the impacts are being felt from that, even back from 2002 with water infrastructure, water quality, millions of dollars that Denver's had to spend to protect the water after that fire. So we'll continue to see the impacts of these other large fires as well. So anyway, all this points to the need to increase, as we say, the pace and scale of forest treatments throughout the state. One tool that we have right now is the Good Neighbor Authority. And that allows us to leverage resources and funding and treat areas not just on state lands exclusively or private lands, but across different ownerships. Originally, it's 2015. It was really focused on the U.S. Forest Service that we do cross-boundary work. But later iterations of this authority through the Farm Bill, we now include Department of Interior BLM lands as well. And that's important because a lot of our state trust lands do border BLM. So just to note too, that, you know, this has been going on or was authorized in 2015. And we have had small sales and projects starting from that time. But really, it's only been within the last few years that we're really ramping up that pace and scale of boundaryless management. A lot of that has to do with getting those processes in place to do these types of projects. So that's coming to fruition, and just the agencies and the people, the land managers within those agencies learning to work with each other on these processes and projects as well. So we're seeing that now really starting to take off. And so now I'd like to show you a couple, just highlight a few projects around the state that are some focusing on some of this new partnership. Example, down in the southeast area around Kansas City, we have the Wahoo Good Neighbor Authority sale. And again, this one's a fairly small sale, 55 acres total. But you can see in the blue, that is the Badger Mountain, if I have that right. Yeah, the Badger Creek project or parcel. That, yeah, there is going to be some increased focus on, I understand. But so yeah, this is at least along that southern kind of border there. I'm seeing creating some units on both the federal side and the state land side there. So that was kind of one of the first projects being done in that area and starting to facilitate this cross boundary work. Did yield, so we did yield some product from this. This is a spruce fir. An area that was its high elevation. So we were able to generate some product and salvage some of the dead material out of there and yield some revenue, not a lot, but it's critical. It's still that it was enough that the contractor would be interested. So salvaging dead dying spruce, reducing wildfire risks, and regeneration. So it's just a picture of that area. And I'll have you note kind of more toward the background of this unit. While it's most of the material has been cut, there are reserved areas of regenerated spruce out there. And those were saved, and that's going to be aiding the next forest that comes onto these treatment units. Down in the southwest area in Dolores County, we have the GNA Zwicker Aspen sale. And you can see how this one lays out, the state parcel, which we term the Zwicker unit, is in that little square there or rectangle. One single unit, and then the US Forest Service units are also there to stuff. So this one was a fairly even breakdown of both state trust land harvesting work and San Juan National Forest. Some of the stats, this is a little bit larger sale and it is again generating some revenue.
Excuse me, a quick question there. What is the aspen at commercial scale here? What's the aspen used for?
Good question. I will, that's on my next slide. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so yeah. Get to that. It, obviously our objective here is to regenerate these aspen stands. Especially on the state trust land, those aspen stands were in decay. A lot of the material was dying and falling down, so we're also improving the grazing resource, able to remove some of that wood. And a lot of those fuels that were accumulating on the ground, so we're also reducing the fire risk there. And then, yeah, to answer your question about product yield, the aspen, especially in the southwest part of the state, is a pretty robust market right now. And so a lot of the material cut there, all of it was being used virtually, except for some that had some rot and some defect in it. But you can see the saw logs, they're sawing out around the Mancos area for like tongue and groove boards, pallet materials. Aspen's extremely valuable because it's non-resinous. That's what that note of food grade is. So that's a higher quality even of pallet and board material, and higher demand for the food industry. Smaller material is it's shredded into Excelsior. It's like a packing material. Again, they can use that with food processing equipment to pack that in because it is non-resinous, so there's a value there. Ends and slab, there's a local market for firewood. And also the sawdust that comes from that there's a pellet mill currently going just right now, so they're using that residue. And finally, the one that was most interesting to me when I was down in that area is the bark that comes off of aspen is used in animal feed. It's high in minerals, so it's highly in demand. So from this and other aspen sales that we have, they really are utilizing a lot of the material, pretty much everything but the leaves of these trees. So yeah, there is a demand for that. And this is one of our units. What we're looking to do is not cut all across the acreage, but have a general mosaic of ages and stand structures across the landscape there. That mountain is Lone Cone, kind of a little bit south and west of Telluride. Some people look at it. So that's what that looks like. Just a note with this too, especially on our state trust land sections, there were exclusion areas, so we are protecting unique and special features within the stand. On the left, it was an area of vigorous, older aspen that we protected and didn't cut. And then on the right was some springs, elk wallows, and cattle grazing features. And we excluded those also from harvest. So we wanted to protect that resource on the state trust land as well. And I'll just go through a couple of these other ones that are critical just throughout this area. The Deer Creek Good Neighbor Project, and that was in Northwest Grand County. Again, where this is a completed sale. This was one of the first sales where 3 ownerships were involved. BLM, state land, trust lands, and the US Forest Service. And actually the partnership with the adjacent private landowner was important here because they provided access and they made this sale and work possible, partnering with that private landowner as well. So again, look, some yield, but a lot of acres treated, especially across the fence on some of these So. Last but not least, we'll move up to the Colorado State Forest, just up to our north. I would term this first sale, the up there timber sale, is kind of one of our more traditional types of timber sales that have taken place on the State Forest Service. There's on the state trust lands. Most of the acreage here was on the state land with 57 service. The objectives, the elk habitat, recreation, enhancement, and of course the lodgepole pine regeneration. So everything, the state forest land in this map is below that yellow line there, so we can see most of those areas are on the state forest, with some up north. Medicine Bow National Forest as well. So reducing those fuels along the access roads in this area. One that we really are excited about that's in the works. Some of you sounds like they've been up on this area in the last few years is the Michigan Ditch Project. But you note here, it's 150 acres compared to some of the others, not a lot of acreage, but these are important acres. And they're difficult acres to treat too. They're on steep slopes. We're going to need specialized equipment to treat these acres. So to that end, we've secured currently the amount of funding from various sources, $500,000 each right now from the Forest Restoration Grant, which State Forest Service administers, and that comes from the legislature. City of Fort Collins, as you can see, is putting up over $500,000. And we also have federal funding coming in on this at $500,000 through congressionally directed spending through our agency. So this is up on Cameron Pass. These areas, this ditch was threatened by the Cameron Peak Fire in 2020. And a lot of that, in the previous picture, the ditch is open. And so any sort of fire impacts along that ditch are going to directly and more than likely to affect the water flow that's going to the city of Fort Collins. You can see it's 25% of the city's water. We will generate some product to benefit local industry. And again, working with this city of Fort Collins, the Forest Service and others, that's a new partnership and project that's going on. This is just phase one and looking to expand this project in future years with future. But before I conclude and we'll get some floor for questions, I also wanted to just speak of some of the new partnerships that we have and new projects. We have a project going on state trust lands north of Salida, and we're involving DNR, which is co-swap funding, and we're engaging with Youth Conservation Corps crews for workforce development. We're also engaging with non-governmental organizations in La Plata County, for example, the National Forest Foundation and the Wild Turkey Federation on a project that's going to go across 4 ownerships, including state trust land at Bayfield. So yeah, those are kind of 2 of the big highlighted projects. Up on the state forest, we also have a study on thinning treatments, and that's going to be a partnership with Colorado Forest Restoration Institute of CSU and the Rocky Mountain Research Center Station with the U.S. Forest Service. Last thing I'd like to mention too is the Colorado State Forest Service Nursery in Fort Collins. We're currently doing an upgrade on that. There's new partners interested in funding that upgrade and facilities maintenance that's going on there. Ultimately, we want to increase our production there. And there's a regional partnership that's growing right now between New Mexico State Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and Colorado State Forest Service Nursery to provide and produce seedlings for post-fire, restoration, after disease, outbreaks, that sort of thing. So really looking up to ramp up that production. So right now we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million over the past 2 years to upgrade the infrastructure there. And so right now, we're still producing some seedlings there, but yeah, that's as these grades are going. So that's another ongoing process. So, thank you, and yeah, if you have any other questions. Okay.
Commissioners, as a reminder, the Forest Service is a huge, important partner for us. They've managed 380,000 of our acres. Been a great partner. We gave them one of our awards this past December and honored their partnership. And then the new state forester, Matt McCombs, I think has really brought new energy and focus and partnerships to their agency. They've been the recipient of a lot of funding. You're doing a lot of you talked about New Mexico, you're doing things with the Nature Conservancy. There's just really a whole lot more new creative energy there, particularly in light of climate change and the fires that we've had. And so I just wanted Mark to be able to give us an overview of some of the projects they're doing for us and some of the opportunities that we're going to have going forward with them. So really, we thank you for your partnership with us. This board has been up to the state forest before and seen your work up there and just super appreciative of your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question on your plant breeding or your making do you do any genetic modification to make them resistant to the beetles or protected in the future?
I mean, it's one of the focuses in the nursery is trying to source materials that are the source materials being close to where they're going to be applied and planted. So that's one thing, so that they're somewhat climate, soil adapted. I can't really necessarily speak to any of the ongoing, and there is a potential there as the nursery develops too for research, being this close to Colorado State University. The nursery actually I referred to and Bill had talked about in New Mexico. That's where I actually got my start. After I graduated, worked in a nursery down in northern New Mexico. And we did do some genetic testing, not necessarily the testing of genetics, but some of our sources we searched for example, ponderosa pines that grew on really sandy soil and had really good drought resistance. And so use that as a source with focus on increased drought and tree stress. So kind of looking to those sorts of things where trees are growing in different types of sources. So.
And there's an effort to make sure that if there is a warming climate, to take some of those seeds that are more adapted to drier, hotter conditions, to bring those kind of do that. It's called assisted migration, where you use those seeds to plant the new ones where it might be.
Yep, there's definitely a lot of ongoing research on that. So.
Mark, I had a question for you. Oh, sorry, I didn't know if anyone could see my hand. I'm not sure what the screen is doing.
It's very tiny when the box is tiny. So always
Okay.
jump in.
Great. Mark, thank you very much for that comprehensive tour, and Mindy for the great package. And a couple things, like Bill, it struck me the leverage from all these strategic partnerships and the leverage of funding that you all have brought to our lands and our forest health is just amazing. And it looks like the trend will continue. I was also really intrigued with and looking forward to the new tools and the surveys, basically the information that you all are creating together. So that anyway is all just great work, and I'm so glad you're our partner. The question I had is probably ignorant, but there's a focus on restoration, which I know is expensive post-fire. And I wondered, in the case of both the pine and the spruce beetle and even aspen, when you're harvesting those to manage the dead areas, is there any effort to do any active restoration there, or does it generally work where the quote regeneration takes care of itself?
It's variable across forest types, as you might expect. On some of the drier areas, that's probably gonna be a lot of the emphasis of actually having to go in and hand plant some of the ponderosa pine, and definitely post fire, especially where you've had a lot of the the cover burned away, so to speak. That we're gonna have to go in there, or the seed sources is gone too, so that's gonna require planting. Some of the lodgepole stands that are, say, up on the state forest, Summit County, some of that. There's a lot of that, there can be good seed sources naturally. And so, in some of those cooler, higher elevation areas, those do regenerate naturally, but vigilance needs to be paid and monitoring to those. We can't just assume that natural regeneration is gonna happen on its own, so.
And add to that. Commissioner Frobe, we've, based on the wildfire data burn areas, we've had about 10,000 acres of state trust land burned in the last 10 years. And through our efforts to do forest carbon and work with partners to reforest some of those areas, I've gone out and looked at those sites. I will say that the natural reforestation is really doing very well in some cases, and in fact, outpacing what we might be able to put in with planted pine trees, for example. The aspen is coming back pretty strong. But I am in discussions with different companies that are interested in doing reforestation. Some of those would involve forest carbon credits and some wouldn't. But we would, whatever projects we did that we would get involved with, we would do in cooperation with the Colorado State Forest Service.
Yeah, that's great, Minnie, because my next follow-up question to this was, can we see our way? Obviously, we can't predict or guarantee, but see our way to future healthier forests that have been regenerated or restored, where we could generate revenues from them, whether it's through sustainable forestry harvest or carbon projects.
That's our goal. And it is expensive to do reforestation. And there are organizations out there that have funding to do that reforestation, and certainly the new nurseries, both the new State Forest Service nursery and another private one they're going to be providing the seedlings to do that for the sites that are appropriate with ecotypic, with the seedlings appropriate for Colorado. They involve, so do we want to have some revenue out of that through either carbon credits or other revenue? And some of them come with requirements to have a limited term easement of up to 40 years. So there are some trade-offs involved with that.
Do you use the Clement Conservation Corps for the reforestation?
Trying to think if we have, I think we have in the past on some projects.
They're increasing the funding to do that, and I hope that might be a good partnership.
Okay, that's good to note. And is that separate from, say, like our kind of youth conservation corps?
It's funded federally.
Okay.
So those funds come, they're trying to use the local conservation and youth group, so contacting them.
There haven't been any on state trust lands yet.
Would be a good solution.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Josie has some history at the youth court. As in she started it.
Yeah.
Like you said, that's, definitely some projects. And I think I met some of you when I was down in Durango a couple of years ago. That was a conservation corps project down there on the Fort Lewis. I was the supervisor.
Right.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark, really appreciate you doing
Yeah,
that.
thanks for coming, Mark.
You heading
Thanks for your
to Fort
time.
Collins now?
What's
You
that?
going up to Fort Collins or?
No, I'm still kind of in the Durango, so.
Oh, you're okay,
Staying, so,
okay, all
yeah.
right.
You,
Just
you
a-
might want to get out of here now.
Yeah, exactly.
Down
Go
I-45.
get in your car immediately. All right. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you joining us. Well,
Yep.
yes, let's take 10. That'll work.
Yep.
Perfect.
Commissioners, we're back live.
Perfect. All right, next up is Lindsay. We are going to be talking about, where are we talking about, Lindsay?
Badger Creek Asset Management.
Of course, right here, Badger Creek. So appreciate you being with us this morning.
Definitely. Thank you, commissioners. For the record, this is Lindsay Brandt. I'm the Stewardship Trust Manager here at the Land Board. And I have an information item for you about the Badger Creek Asset Management Plan. Nothing to vote on today, but just to kind of keep you updated. This property is actually slated for our August board tour, we hope. So at that time, we'll be able to show you some of the things that are covered in the asset management plan. All the photos in this presentation are of the property. This photo was taken kind of from the west side of the property, looking east toward Black Mountain here, which is just off the state trust land. And there is more than one tree on the property. But I like this nice
I like
slope
that tree.
opinion. It was looking good to me, so.
Forest Service takes great care of it.
The Lone Tree Asset Management.
So this is a brand new asset management plan. If you recall, asset management plans, or AMPs for short, are one of the 7 stewardship tools that we use here at the Land Board. And typically, we develop these plans for our large contiguous property, and the plans set goals, objectives, and management actions. This is now the 7th asset management plan in our portfolio. And development of this plan was really a team effort. The district managers and all of our business program managers contributed to the plan and weighed in on the goals and management strategies. Here's just a photo. We did a site visit last September, kind of in part of the plan preparation. And this is some of our staff visiting one of the restoration sites out on Badger Creek.
When does that album come out?
I say, I feel like
Right.
a band could be our rock and roll album cover. So the Badger Creek property is about 35,000 acres. It sits on the Park Fremont County line, and it's actually shared between our southwest and our south central district. So we have the benefit of 2 district managers with eyes on this property. Zooming in a little bit, here's the actual outline of the Badger Creek property. It's about 15 miles as the crow flies north east of Salida, and about 20-ish miles southeast of Buena Vista. Hartselle is about 20 miles to the north of there as the crow flies. So why did we decide to prepare this asset management plan? Not only does it align with our strategic plan goals, it's a large property. It has really great natural values. We recently designated much of it into the stewardship trust. But it's also a property with kind of a lot going on. We have a lot of opportunities to do some great enhancement projects out there. And we actually have an existing partnership working on the ground that has also been doing really great enhancement work and stewardship work. And putting all of these goals and these things sort of into an asset management plan really just facilitates our work as staff to continue to steward and enhance the property, and kind of just gives us some good direction. The other nice thing about asset management plans is it's kind of one of the opportunities where we really have kind of staff collectively making decisions about how our property should be managed. So just a few highlights. Again, the property is about 35,000 acres. There are currently 6 grazing lessees and 1 private recreation lease. Also, much of the property is in the public hunting and fishing access program through CPW.
Here's just a quick overview of where the grazing leases lie. Much of the layout of these leases are kind of driven by topography and also adjacent fee land and federal leases. And I do want to give a shout out to our lessees. Many of our grazing lessees have been managing the property for quite a long time. And they've really been doing a pretty good job, and we appreciate that. Most of the property is also in the stewardship trust for quite a wide range of natural values. And we have one designated natural area on the property through the CPW Natural Areas Program. So here you can see the orange represents the stewardship trust, and the green square here in the center rectangle represents the designated natural area, which is designated primarily for unique geologic formations as well as rare pits. One just interesting historic tidbit for you. While some of this property was acquired at statehood, most of it was actually acquired as a result of the Federal Taylor Grazing Act. And the Taylor Act was passed in the early years of the Dust Bowl, and it was really intended to kind of reduce injury to public lands and deterioration by due to overgrazing. And so the Taylor Act actually established the BLM grazing allotment system. It was really, they were really trying to stabilize the livestock industry that was heavily dependent on the use of public land, federal land at that time. But the other thing that the Taylor Act did is it resulted in a couple of large land exchanges between the federal government and the state land board. And so two of these exchanges in 1943 and 1952 is when we had significant pieces of land being added to our surface ownership in Badger Creek. And since that time, with the exception of really development of some, a few roads and grazing infrastructure, the property hasn't changed a lot between now and then. So as I mentioned, the asset management plan laid out goals, strategies, and actions in chapter 4. And I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I did want to highlight a few of these for you. And just to share the property, we're looking kind of south here. We have a lot of these, the property's made up a lot of these high mountain grasslands. And then here to the south, you're looking at kind of the Wah Mountain area, which is where Mark had just showed you those photos from what they call the Wahoo Mountain Forest Project. So the first of one of the goals we have in the plan is really to support the adaptive grazing efforts that are already being implemented by our lessees. We want to continue to support development of infrastructure, especially alternative water points, which can help to disperse grazing. Since this is a very arid area, these additional watering locations for cattle can really have a huge impact on dispersing the livestock across the rangeland and really spreading their use out. We also want to support application of new tools such as virtual fencing. And all of these efforts really just enhance both the stewardship of the trust land, and ideally they also enhance the profitability for our grazing leases. We also want to better understand and manage our water resources. It's a property where we could benefit from some additional understanding of what our ground and surface water sources are. We'd like to complete an inventory of those and potentially adjudicate any water sources that would clarify our ownership of them on the property. This photo is one of the Gribble's Run drainage on the property. You can see here on the left side, kind of a nice wet meadow and a ditch that is from a point of diversion that is actually held by an adjacent landowner where they have a right to divert from our. We also want to work with CPW to continue to manage recreation access under the Hunting and Fishing Access Program. We want to work with them to make sure hunters and anglers are going where they are supposed to and kind of allowed to go, and help them to avoid trespassing on areas where they're not supposed to be. Additionally, we want to look and consider additional recreation opportunities that might have a minimal or no impact on both our lessees and existing natural values. We want to continue to pursue opportunities for riparian and wet meadow restoration enhancement. Most of the riparian and wet meadow restoration projects have been implemented by the Badger Creek Partnership on the main stem of Badger Creek, which you see here. But this property, especially on state trust land, has also many tributary streams that could have potential for enhancement. And some of these we could even consider as potential ecosystem service lease opportunities. And speaking of the Badger Creek Partnership, we want to continue to participate and support the efforts of this partnership. It's a fantastic partnership made up of not only the land management agencies, ourselves, the federal agencies, but also many private landowners and ranchers and lessees. And they're really doing great work in the area in terms of restoring and enhancing Badger Creek and doing some of these kind of new innovative grazing projects. If you recall our December meeting, we actually gave this group our Partner of the Year award through their project coordinator, Buffy Lent, at the Central Colorado Conservancy. And in 2019, we actually gave Badger Creek Ranch our Lessee of the Year. Another goal is to mitigate upland head cuts and erosion. So the property does have quite a few sites where it's experiencing upland erosion. A lot of this we think probably occurred as a result of historic uses. If you recall the part of the plan that talked about there used to be really big cattle drives that came through the area. And it was also used for a long time for just season-long kind of unrestricted grazing. So that use combined with sort of just a very dry landscape in general has kind of these big sudden thunderstorms that happen. You get areas where you kind of have these upland drainages, and then any little disturbance, whether it be a trail or a wagon rut or an animal trail or somebody just dug a hole, the water comes down in a big storm and it just starts to cut these head cuts out and erode them out. And they just continually, slowly over time, continue to march kind of up these valleys. Ultimately, they result in something like this. I don't think we're ever going to fix a big erosion goalie like this, but we can certainly mitigate them from advancing further into our uplands. I do want to stress a lot of this erosion is not the result of current uses and during grazing. I think a lot of it really comes from some of the historic activities that happened on the property. And finally, we'd like to better understand and protect cultural resources on the property. We are already aware of a handful of areas that do have important cultural resources, but it's 35,000 acres. It's a lot of land to kind of wrap your mind around when it comes to cultural resources. We currently have the PCRG, the Paleo Cultural Resources Group, under contract. They are the group that did the big survey down at Chancellor Ranch for us. And they're working on sort of a desktop evaluation and plan of, what do we already know? What data is already there? What additional areas should we maybe focus on? Apply for some grants from the State Historic Fund to kind of see what else needs to be done on the property. So that pretty much sums up the goals I wanted to highlight for you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'd also appreciate your feedback if you think we've missed anything, if there's anything else we need to think about or focus on in this plan.
Thanks, and it's, I think, fairly technical on the riparian work that's being done. And in the package here, it talks about speed bumps.
Yes.
When do we cross the line on impairing senior water rights? Or I know CWC, I've been curious about this for a while when I started hearing from CWCB granting interim flow rights, which are just, let's save them, see of this. But it is, you guys are considering that, obviously, I guess.
Yes, and great question. Justin's not here to back me up, and I know enough about water rights to be very dangerous, but what we've learned, at least on this property, actually, the Badger Creek Partnership has, there's a hydrologist from Colorado Mesa University working with us and actually doing groundwater monitoring, because one of the things that's kind of, I think, missing from that big question is what is happening to the long-term flows. And so they're actually studying that on the ground in areas kind of before and after these speed bumps are installed. I know there was also a House bill,
SB 270.
thank you, that recently came out that actually addressed this topic and said, you know, these restoration projects are important and they don't necessarily inhibit the water rights. And there's a great training that's happened several times. I'm sure we could share a link with you that talks really about how that bill addresses restoration projects and kind of helps untangle that water right issue.
And I'm 100% in favor. I'm just,
Yeah, because it is something that, you know, some of these groups, they're pulling together a lot of people and, you know, kind of shoestring type budgets, and all of a sudden you throw a water right thing in the middle of it and, you know, they could stop it real quick. So it's something they're definitely thoughtful about.
Lindsay, do they actually, is that Buffalo Drop something that they document that was used for that?
Good question. They're looking at it. One expert has said, no, there's no buffalo drops anywhere south of Wyoming. We don't know. It remains to be seen.
Commissioner
But there
Fro.
wasn't.
Go ahead, Mindy, and then Commissioner Fro.
This is Mindy Gottsegen, the Conservation Services Manager. There was definitely an encampment site there. The TV ring is very close to the site. So PCRG also has an expert on buffalo drops. And so they're excited to be taking a look at that. So we'll find out more soon.
Be interesting.
And it will be a stop on our board tour for sure.
That's what I was just gonna ask.
Yeah.
Commissioner Fro.
Hi there, Lindsay, thank you for the presentation and especially to all the staff. These asset management plans are an incredible resource. I mean, everyone coming together and at the outset being able to have the time and space to think a little strategically and to be able to capture kind of all the relevant information. I mean, not only does it help you manage it, but I can only imagine that in the future, as it relates to responding to opportunities or even marketing the property, you have such a database of its attributes and characteristics. It just seems like a very value-added process, and I'm sure it takes a lot of time. So these are terrific. My questions, I had a couple of questions. One, in the ag section, I didn't really see you commenting on this. So, you know, generally speaking, the lessees on the property, how far advanced are they in sort of regenerative grazing and, you know, forage and grassland management in your estimation relative sort of to the general population of our lessees?
That's a great question, and I would almost defer to our district managers to answer that. Since they're not here, I'll say I think it varies. I know some of the lessees that we've had more, at least I have had more opportunity to interact with, are very interested in that. They're, you know, getting grants to pilot virtual fencing projects, doing that kind of work. Some of our other lessees I just haven't connected with as much and have not been able to really get the specifics on how they're managing that. But I know some of the groups, I've actually had a lessee say, you know, in the last few years, we've changed the way we're doing everything. And so it's really inspiring to see people get excited about the adaptive grazing and, you know, how they're trying to implement it on the landscape. It does take time and money, so sometimes it's a slow process, but they're very interested.
Yeah, great. And then I had two other questions. One was, you know, a lot of times the various boards of commissioners wrestle with that. Do you respond to a sale opportunity? Do you sell something? Do you not? And just looking at this, I was curious if there's any history or any reflection on sitting here today, whether or not, you know, the disposal of the property in early 2000, sort of, how does that affect things? Is that something that maybe might have been good to hang on to, or, you know, are there implications for our management? Just anyway, any comments on that? I thought it was a significant prior event.
Yeah, just to recap what Commissioner Frobe, in the mid 2000s, about 17,000 acres of the property were disposed of. Do you have any comments about that? It's a long view question. I appreciate it, but
Well, that's Actually, I don't have any additional information, but we certainly would have records in our land transaction record of why that sale happened. And we can follow up with that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to
It
know.
might be an interesting discussion at some point. I mean, it was a significant amount of land. And just, I don't know, for curiosity, as we, again, constantly try to balance the tension of earnings today and asset value tomorrow and splitting versus aggregating assets. Anyway, it just seemed like it was an interesting case. And then I guess my final comment is looking at the property, and I do hope we get a tour out there again sometime in the near future. I'd love to go see it. But it did, oh, great. It did seem like it might be a candidate for some of the private camping options to generate a little bit, because there's no real private, there's limited camping in that overall South Park area. So
Yes.
anyway, just a thought.
Our lessee, actually, Badger Creek Ranch, which kind of holds a small in-holding in the property, they do offer camping. It's on their fee land. But it's certainly something, Abe could consider on some of the state trust land.
I had a question about, down at the Stirrup Range. I mean, is that like the last documented sighting of a grizzly here in Colorado?
I don't know if it was the last documented sighting of a grizzly, but there was a sort of a famed grizzly there that was very large and surly, I guess, that, kind of.
Most grizzlies.
Surlier than most grizzlies, that was known to live in that area, and, there's a history somewhere, and I think some of it's history and some of it's kind of oral history or hearsay. It was shot in that area.
Well, this man has an unfortunate name, and I say, yeah, it's for war. Pig.
Oh, yeah. I was also neglected to mention in my presentation, we did share a draft of the asset management plan with our lessees, and asked for feedback, and we got some, basically supportive comments. So nothing too in depth, but they said, we think it's great that you're working on this, and, please don't raise our rent. Just-
Terrific. Great work. Really appreciate the presentation.
Well, we're seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, things go right, we'll be there in August.
All right, Elliot, I believe we're to you. Review of lease terms.
Yes. Good morning, commissioners. Elliot Boyd, Assistant Director of Sustainability and Working Lands. This morning, I'd like to share with you a compilation of some information related to the length of leases in each of our programs. We assembled this information in part because of, in response to questions that we've received from this board. And also, as part of an exercise we've taken on to look comprehensively at many of our different components of our leases as sort of a continuous improvement effort. So happy to share this with you. As you know, there's a variation in the length of lease terms across our programs. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time examining those differences and the sources and so forth. Of course, this is a statewide initiative. So some of the factors influencing lease length, we'll show you a graphic chart, which was in the board packet tab 4. But let me just walk through some of these points. Obviously, they can depend on the program, and we'll talk about why that would be. There are different kinds of leases, obviously. There's planning, there's exploration, there's production. So obviously, those are going to have different leases. Lease lengths, statute in some cases required it, certainly with the agricultural leases. Industry standards are a big part of it. We're doing business with people, and so we have to respond to what happens in those industries. There's also the point, and you've heard this, we discussed this before, about the amortization of the investments that our lessees make, and that we have to respond to that to make sure that it's valuable to them. And then, of course, tied to that is the way that they finance some of those improvements and what the timeframes of the standard financing arrangements would be.
And then certainly with the mineral side of it, oftentimes the length is tied to amount of time to extract the resources. We also, as part of this effort and part of the graphic that Kristen worked very hard on, we put in some information about the decision authority that impacts them because we think it's relevant. There are, of course, ultimately all the decision authority sits with the board, but there are situations where you have given us authority to act. Usually that has to do with access permits, planning exploration leases. The standard recreation lease is a staff authority. Agricultural renewals that don't have a competitive component to them, and commercial office leases. And then the things that we always come and have a discussion and get a board order specifically for would be things like production leases for these things. The commercial ground leases always require more conversation with you. Rights of way, and then water, and in particular things like groundwater, which have long lease terms. So the graphic that we put together is here on the screen, but as I can see, the Commissioner Heath is looking at it on the sheet. So it's on page, I think it was 96 of your package. Will allow you to look at it a little bit more carefully. We have information about the program, we have decision authority, and then the standard duration of leases. So of course, there's always the ability to adjust lengths, but we thought that it would be useful to put in graphic form what some of these lengths are. So I can kind of walk through them, but really I would open it up maybe at this point and ask you if there are specific questions about this exercise that we've gone through in this graphic that we prepared that you'd like me to focus on.
Yeah.
I guess when I first looked at it, and you talked about decision authority,
Yeah.
that's where I had a question.
Okay.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring in. I see that staff has authority to make the decisions on the shorter term leases, and then the board approves the lease. And I guess this is a question I had earlier. It doesn't seem like the sequence really works that way, because in that case, the lessee got word that they had not been approved, but it had never come to the board actually for decision. And so it's unclear to me where the decision actually is. And the same is true over here. When we look at the chart, it said that, like the only really long leases beyond 50, maybe beyond 30, but for water, and yet with the golf course, it was 90-year lease. And I don't know how those decisions get made that vary from what our process is.
Golf course was 50.
Pardon?
The golf course was 50.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But it was proposed to be 90, wasn't it? It was long.
Is long, and that's a ground lease, and so that comes back to these real estate decisions where there's a level of investment and improvement that's gone into it and a financing of it, and so
But
absolutely.
it only shows here that long leases were for water.
Let's see.
Well,
Commercial.
Commercial.
so if you go to commercial real estate.
Plus.
Just the 30
Yeah, so 30 is kind of, because a 30-year mortgage is an increment that often, but as you've already seen, 50 for ground leases is not uncommon. The lease for Sherman, the Sherman Affordable Housing Project, and we have a limit where we can't go more than 50 on those because of statute says that within a municipality we can't, but certainly, and we'll have this conversation with Ninth and Grant and with Dow Junction, that those ground leases will be long-term. And so I think the golf course fits into that category where there's a lot of investment on it. And so therefore, to make it.
And I think just this morning, when we talked about, the length of leases that we've had regarding water. We
Yes.
See that when those are really long leases, we have very opportunity. Impact a lifetime.
I think your observation is a good one, and rights of way would be an example where instead of having those be perpetual, they're now 30-year terms. We want to understand what's going on around the property, how that encumbrance affects it 30 years from now, get paid again, perhaps remove the encumbrance. And so I think your point is a good one. And it's part of the reason we do an exercise like this is to say, is our policy achieving our goals? So as Elliot said, we did this in part to be a continuous improvement organization and learn that let's not do 99-year water leases anymore. We're giving up too much there. Rights of way that were perpetual. The CDOT one at Dow Junction is a great example where that property had no value when we did the real estate, or almost none, and now here we sit 50 years later, and geez, that's incredibly valuable in that valley because of what's going on around, and yet we don't have the ability through contract to end it. We had to find a different way to say, hey, there's a higher and better use here.
Yeah, so how do we do that so that future boards,
Well, all of this almost all this gets done through policy. And so we bring you policy reviews every 3 years for every line of business. And we say, are the terms that we're bringing to this line of business the appropriate terms to achieve our goals? And so they're set through policy. Now, as Elliot said, in some cases, statute dictates it. So agricultural leases, 10-year terms. You asked also about the Phillips case. So that came before the board lots of times before the staff made a decision. But what the policy says is that when there's a competitive bid, the staff reviews it and makes a recommendation. And that's exactly what happened. We made a recommendation. We didn't make a decision, we made a recommendation. And we told both parties what the recommendation was, and they have an opportunity to come appeal the staff's recommendation. So that's what actually played out, is what was designed in our policies. We staff did all the work, evaluated all the stuff, made a recommendation. If the parties were happy, there wouldn't be an issue. If they're unhappy, they get to come to you and say, we don't like what staff was going to recommend. Here our side of the story. So I would say that rather than Phillips, I would say Phillips worked exactly the way the policy is designed.
Because no decision's made at all until we make.
Until you make it, right? And so there's another component of this about how and when the decision gets made, right? So there's a consent agenda that we attach to the staff report. That's one level. There's a board leasing agenda that you all look at and we vote on specifically, and we call out specific items on it. And then there's an even higher level of specific board items where you get all of the data about that one item, and we make a specific presentation. So yeah, I'll stop answering. Lots of other people have comments on this.
I'm gonna have Kristen add
Just to
to that in a moment.
Kristen, just to clarify the semantics, sometimes staff says we decide, but what we decided was on our recommendation. You were the deciders, for instance, on Chico Basin Ranch via the board leasing agenda. So I just really want to clarify that point. Staff made a recommendation that appeared on the board leasing agenda that you all approved, which is distinct from the consent agenda.
Well, that's why all our motions start with staff recommends.
Right.
And then we take it from there. Or board orders, sir.
Is that landing right for you?
When I think that what Bill was making the point is that if we just made decisions based on a case-by-case basis where a particular situation came up, we put it to you, the board makes a decision about that particular situation. It's a little bit like a legal situation where you can always look at a precedent and say, well, before we did it on this and that one we did that. But the idea of having a policy where you can very clearly express what the intent is, I think is a great tool for this organization because it allows us to go look at the policy without having to check with you before we bring the recommendation, say, I think that this was what we all decided. And so I guess my point is that if you have strong feelings about the intent of some of the things that we do, maybe need to be expressed in a different way. The policy updates are the way that this organization can say more strongly, we would only do a 99-year lease if it would had a very, very compelling reason and we need XYZ defense for that.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, so I think your point is excellent.
I just
Yeah.
felt like there's a lot of leeway.
Yeah.
On 30 plus.
Yes,
Well,
yeah, plus is a big plus.
and I just want to, Director Ryan highlighted sort of 3 different approvals and decision-making. For that 30-year plus, those are brought to the commissioners and you decide and vote on them. Those staff, as always, brings a recommendation, but for example, the golf lease, that was brought with a recommendation from staff for the commissioners to decide and consider whether.
And that had gone through staff and everything.
Oh, yeah.
The golf.
And these are dead horses, but.
Well, there's good
No, but
examples.
your point is a good one.
Yeah.
See the process, and if the commissioners aren't comfortable with the process as it's been applied, then it makes, it's a starting point for reevaluating the process, but the golf course lease, which was a long-term, a 50-year lease, went through a lot of staff work, and then staff presented, here's our results, will the board approve the lease, including the long-term lease nature of it. So in the process of a wide latitude, the commissioners largely have full latitude to decide length of leases. Staff is operating under different constraints, but ultimately it comes to the commissioners' approval if it doesn't meet the delegated authority. In slightly different concept, but again, highlighting what Kristen and Director Ryan have highlighted for the Chico Basin, another recent example of this. Again, staff did not make a decision. They made a recommendation that if none of the parties had objected, would have been approved by the board through the board leasing agenda, which as you know, is a amalgamation of various leasing decisions. Because a party wanted further consideration of it, it was broken out into a full individual item. But again, staff wasn't making a decision. The decision wasn't technically being appealed. Staff was making a recommendation that was being reviewed by the board in detail when it was all said and done. And again, it's an example of how the process works. And if the commissioners are feeling that the process isn't achieving overall goals that the commissioners want, then they're starting points for discussing revising policies to revise the process. But I do want to stress, ultimately, in both those cases, the decisions with the commissioners.
Right.
And neither of those fell within delegated authority of staff to make a decision. But were put before the board within the process of how staff makes recommendations.
Yeah, sorry, I was just want to, keeping on these lines, and then two kind of more nitpicky things. First and foremost, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I really love good infographics. But it really speaks to a lot of this overall conversation that it's providing us context. So I think, yes, we have great policies. I think when we are looking at a new lease, it's helpful for us to because we haven't spent as much time with it as the staff has at the point that it's coming to us. We do have excellent summaries and staff reports, that type of thing, but understanding kind of where it falls in this type of structure, the lease that we're looking at, and how that does or does not in these, you know, in the term and that type of thing, deviate from the norm, kind of here's the bucket of this type of lease that we typically have, and here's, you know, is this statutory, is this, I think some of that would be helpful. And to that process point, you know, not to overly pick on the golf course, but that is just in terms of a situation where more, yes, we are delegated with that authority to make the decision, but we're trying to come up with what are the parameters for that decision. And so I think some of this of like, why is this a deviation, by how much, you know, so that we understand the variables that
Yeah.
So,
we need to be considering. I remember that was feeling like a
Yep.
something that was not fully, you know, that we were trying to get to in the meeting to get to a decision, but that just laying that groundwork of, and even, you know, we're talking about, so I mean, even seeing something like this, but maybe it's not all the leases we have under these categories, but if we're looking at something that is a planning lease to a production lease.
Right.
I think, because I'm curious, kind of when we say we have that kind of structure for renewable energy, and then also for private recreation and for, you know, just,
Commissioner Clark,
Yeah.
let me make sure I'm understanding your ask here. And let me use a right-of-way example. I think what you're saying is I want you to be more explicit
yes,
when you are deviating from policy. And so, for example, I can think of some of David Rodenberg's cover sheets where it says right in the summary, this is coming to you because staff can approve a 50-foot wide right of way and this one's 75 feet wide. So you need to see it and act on it because it's wider than normal. I made the numbers up, by the way, David, sorry if you're listening. I'm sure I've messed up the policy, but so the golf course, for example, we would say, hey, normally we don't do anything longer than 30 years, but the guys who are building this are going to invest 20 million bucks into it, and they can't have 3 of the 18 holes go away in 10 years. So those sorts of things. You're asking for explicit call outs of where we're not within policy.
well, it's that and, so yes, we understand that the only reason that's coming to us is that it's one that exceeds staff authority for that and that there is some deviation. So recognizing that is the fact, but then I think it's more of the, yes, what are the unique variables here? And being able to compare that to what are other leases of this type that have been at similar timeframes, or what are the timeframes that they have been, so that we can further understand kind of, like you're saying, it's like these investment things and other considerations that go into this one. How is that different than the ones that do fall into the standard category? And then, sorry,
I think it's just giving context.
Yeah.
it is,
To the
it's
why.
entirely, context for the why, so that we're like, okay, we are, because you guys have already vetted that and understanding that, and you're presenting them to us to a degree, but also, I think even when you're saying this goes away from the policy, can we just include the policy again?
Sure.
As well, just so
No,
that
absolutely.
we're also starting, you know, with you in that. And the other piece for that is, what I'm hearing you say is we have different policies for the different lines of business.
Right.
But again, in that way, it could be helpful to look at them, again, grouping the ones that kind of fit more similar structures like exploration to production, to understand, to compare and contrast those and understand kind of why it's this period of time for geothermal and it's this period of time for recreation and that type of thing. I just always struggle with if there's just whole numbers in front of us, like how to contextualize this, what are the trade-offs? We need something else to relate that to. So that's kind of a big picture concept there. The nitpicky things in the beautiful infographic are one thing that's sticking out, two things that are sticking out to me. One is under renewable energy, solar. It says 20+ years, but it stops at the 20 years.
Sure.
So should that not, I mean, ultimately, that is one that could be much longer, so we can see.
You're right.
So just wanted to note that. And then also a question on under solid minerals. It says exploration permit instead of exploration lease. Do we know? Okay, thank you. I'm like, can there be a footnote
Yes,
asterisk?
so for the record, Ben Techner, Solid Minerals Manager. This is an excellent question and an inconsistency in how, where things live in different policies. Currently, solid minerals exploration activities or exploration leasing lives in our permits policy. As staff, we believe that that is not where it should live. And when you see this year, when you see the solid minerals policy, one of the goals is to pull that out of the permits policy and put it in the solid minerals policy. And at which point it will be properly named a lease, which is what it is.
Okay, so.
So
then-
we will make that consistent later this year when we review the policy.
Correct.
Got it.
That's been a wish list item since shortly after the last.
But maybe we could note that here because this color in the legend says exploration lease, so just.
Yeah.
Why are those different? Otherwise, it feels like. a
And to
typo.
be clear, for anyone who else who's maybe listening, we call it an exploration permit. It is not a permit, even though it lives in our permits
Yeah.
policy. It is a lease. It has the same type of contracts as a lease. It's an agreement with a landowner. It is not a DRMS permit or a CDPHE permit or any of
Yeah.
those other things.
Since that has been confusing to the public.
Yes, this is,
Perhaps.
Yeah.
yes.
This is all very timely.
Yeah, thank you. And then the final one is, since it came up here about the rights of way. It says 30 years or held in perpetuity. But I thought I heard you saying that we're not. We don't do that anymore. So is this like just reflecting that we still have some that are that, but we have policy now that doesn't?
Yeah.
Well, so for example, a road
Yeah.
is going to be perpetual. A power line, we're limiting to 30 years. So we didn't know how to distinguish
So
those
over
here.
to CDOT or something.
Yeah.
Probably last week.
Yeah, I just like more asterisks and those things because
Yep.
if the graphic's only as good as you're not asking
Yeah.
additional questions, why
Yeah.
is it that? Okay, thanks.
And to respond to the first part of your question, what I'm hearing is that information sessions on some of the types of things, business that we're doing that maybe needs some of that extra time would be beneficial so that there's an opportunity to have a conversation, dig into it. You give us some guidance as we're finalizing some of the recommendations that we're going to come to you and then say, and we need to vote today on this. Might be helpful to be able to dig a little deeper into the topic.
I think absolutely, and specifically that in those sessions,
Yeah.
that when we're looking, we're getting policies to review and it's the red lines against that other, the old version of that policy specific language, but being able to contextualize that because we're looking at them at different times. It'd be nice to kind of compare some provisions in one type of lease policy with one that's somewhat similar, just to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Philip, and then Josie.
Yeah, I had a, in regard to the agricultural leases and some of the things that have been brought up and asked regarding 118 rights. So just so I understand the large ranches, we do not have 118 rights associated with those leases. And then I learned, or we all learned a couple months ago that those lands enrolled in CRP were also ineligible for 118 rights. Is there any other leases that do not have 118 rights?
The only one that leaps to mind is I'm not quite sure of the phrasing that the policies call or the programs call it, but William Woolston's 1 year.
Right.
Oh,
Young,
annual.
young
yeah.
rancher,
No, annual grazing lease program.
the annual. So those, have a different term, they're 1 year.
Yeah,
And, partially because of that 1 year and the nature of the program, those two, I believe. Designed for the nature of the program to put a different type of program and different type of, lease out on the market.
have we, again, going back to the large ranches where we're not doing 25-year leases anymore. Is
Correct.
that something to consider, to contemplate putting 118 on those? Again, now they're not 25-year leases.
Yeah, and we've had the conversation, I mean, and it's, to be clear, it's as part of the lease, we ask the people who are applying to waive the right, so it's not that we've taken it away. We mutually agree with whoever is interested in the property that, you know, for the benefit of this special situation, that they waive that, so it's a little bit of a nuance, but.
But if they say I don't waive it,
Yeah,
Then they don't bid.
then they don't bid, so they make a choice, that this particular kind of property, that would be something that they agree that they could waive the right to it. It's something that we could talk about.
Chavez, Greg did a presentation on this a few years ago about those assets where we ask lessees to waive the rights are assets where they are large, valuable, and we own all the improvements. So we are they're different from our other properties. They're not like an in-holding to a neighbor where they're critical to, you know, their agricultural operation. So we could redo that presentation for you, but I think we've the board decided some years ago that those assets were unique and valuable enough that we wanted to be able to have a clean evaluation every 10 years. And we unfortunately had the experience where we had bad lessees and it was hard to get rid of them. And we had this very valuable asset that we were stuck with the wrong partner.
On stewardship.
From a stewardship perspective and perhaps from a market, you know, I guess the market could still bid, but yeah. So I think organizationally we thought with that 7 out of 1,800 leases that we should not grant those rights. And so I'm happy to, I know where that memo lives. I'm happy to resend that to you from when we did that a couple of years ago.
I had another question. It is regarding the final item on the graphic on water. And I would ask that we at least put that same number that we do on commercial real estate and others here right away, where we say 30 plus.
30 plus.
Somehow I think putting 99 in there sort of immediately makes people think, oh yeah, that's possible. And I don't think we would in fact consider so.
Well, we did, we considered that and voted affirmatively in Colorado Springs because the zoning said you had to have 99 years of yours.
So you can, but I think to your point, again, the graphics of it, does it look better to say 30 plus?
It's 30
I'd rather
plus,
have it all say.
all the way to
Yeah,
been 80.
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, if there is a situation, we will bring it to you and say, in this case, we are recommending 99 because of this. Then you can say no. Other ones? Well, it's continuous improvement, so we can continue to edit and polish and add information to it. So thank you for your comments and we are open for other comments in the future as you have them.
Thank you. No, I think that was a timely and good conversation. We have had some interesting leases of late.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Staff report, good staff report in the
We're in-
packet.
Yep, tab 5 or page 97 for those of you with the full PDF package. So this is Bill Ryan, Director, and I guess the most important thing I could possibly highlight in here is that Commissioner Scanlon and Heath were reappointed by the Senate. Yay. Glad, thank you both for your commitment to the land board and for agreeing to another 4 years.
Thank goodness I'm in line with Josie. She bedazzled them. I kind of just am in the show.
I'm
It all
sorry.
works out great.
I thought when you brought in the yard signs and bumpers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The shopping bags you handed out as part of your campaign, yeah.
Yeah, I'll forward that. That's probably true. Good feedback.
Let me just open it up to any questions about any of the items in here. Lots of energy things going on, geologic carbon storage, and there are carbon management working groups and hydrogen regulation studies. So Crystal and Ben and Katie are all very busy on the energy side.
It's all good work.
Good.
All right.
I'll cede the rest of my time to Mr. Smith, who has
All right.
exciting housing
Go
deals
with
to bring
final
us.
action. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christopher Smith, the Real Estate Section Manager. So I'm here today to recommend a 50-year ground lease to Gorman and Company on our 9th and Grant property.
You'll talk about why 50 in a minute. Right? Way to read the room.
So should the board approve this lease today, this would bring in a total of approximately $32 million over the term of the lease. And in addition to supporting a couple of the board's strategic plan goals, it also supports the state's affordable housing goals. The property is located here in the Denver metro area, and specifically, it is just a block from here. This is the property that the board toured last April. So just under a year ago. And it's in the red here, as you can see. The property is currently, there's currently 2 long-term ground leases for parking on the property. And the larger of those ground leases expires at the end of this year. So that's why this kind of came up to our attention here. So in last October, we put together a request for proposals seeking affordable housing developments from developers. And then last December, we received 5 responses to that. So we received 5 different proposals, and we put together a staff team to review those proposals. And we reviewed it based on several different criteria. 1 was the developer's previous experience. 2 was the development concept itself. 3 was the financial return to the board, and 4 was kind of the overall understanding of the site. And through this process, staff unanimously voted to select Gorman internally here. They are a national firm with strong local experience, and they have significant experience in Denver and in this neighborhood. Gorman and Company has completed 12 projects in Colorado over the last 10 years. They have 7 projects that they're working on currently. Most notably, they redeveloped the property immediately across the street. So I'll move to this, but it's called the Coburn property. It's located here. It's 91 units. It was a $24 million project. So they're familiar with not only City of Denver, but also with this specific neighborhood. So, and then lastly, they provided the highest financial return to the board. So their development plan anticipates 150 units. And their lease rates are based on an average of 60% area median income. The 150 units are comprised of 39 studio apartments, 99 one-bedroom apartments, and 12 two-bedroom apartments. This is an artist rendering of what it could look like. You'll notice sort of the Art Deco type architecture here. This is in line with the neighborhood. Again, this property is just kind of 2 diagonal blocks from here, and you all have walked the Poets Row neighborhood here and seen the architecture, and it's that's what they're going for, is to fit in with the architecture. So the ground lease terms that we're proposing to the board is a 50-year term. The 50-year term is, our ground leases, depending on what's going on the land, can be, somewhere between 30 and 50 years. If it's something smaller on the land, we would do a shorter term to match it up with the financing. However, up the street here, when we did 13th and Sherman, we did a 50-year term. And in this case, 50 years does sort of align with their financing stack. I'll specify that a little bit more on the next slide. But also there's a limit of 50 years under statute. So we cannot do anything more than 50 years. The terms of this are the starting rental rate to the board for the ground lease is $350,000 per year, and that increases 2.6% every year. And at the end of the 50-year term, the building will revert to the land board. Some additional terms are the land board cannot subordinate its land to financing, and the annual payments will start upon completion of the project. So once they receive a certificate of occupancy, we anticipate that to be about 2 years from now. And then lastly, going back to the 50-year term, this property will be subject to the City of Denver's affordable housing 60-year restriction. So this is a restriction City of Denver puts on their financing. So when the property reverts to us at year 50, we will still be subject to that 60 years. So we will keep it as an affordable housing project for at least another 10 years beyond that. So with all that, staff is here to recommend that the board approve a 50-year ground lease to Gorman and Company based on the terms and conditions presented here. I would note that Kimball Kringle, who you all met last fall up in Keystone, who is the president of Colorado's division of Gorman, is online here and is available to answer any questions, as am I.
The project we just completed on Sherman, they completed on Sherman, did it have that 60-year restriction?
Yes, it did.
I remember that.
This is Commissioner Clark. So yeah, thank you for, that was definitely jumping out to me, kind of the 50 years versus the 60 years. So just want to parse that a little bit. So obviously understanding the statutory requirement for the ground lease itself, which is recorded to only be 50 years. There will be a separate deed restriction recorded that is the 60 years required by the city. I think this gets into kind of our intentions going forward, that, so yes, that would be a minimum of 10 years to maintain that affordability restriction. You said the building will revert to the land board at the end of 50 years. So is that mandatory, or is there an option for? Yeah, do we want the building back at that point?
So is your question, is there an option to renew it, or is there an option to?
An option to renew,
okay.
Yeah.
There, in this lease, there's not an option to renew, but that's certainly something that a future board could consider. So they could consider this, to renew it for 10 or 20 or whatever years. Right now, we can't offer that option because that would get us beyond the 50 years.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So
that is interesting. Okay, okay.
But the developer could approach us at any time and offer, to buy the land from us to reunite the estate for them. And we wrestled with this at 13th and Sherman, and sort of said, we'll let our grandkids negotiate it out with your grandkids, and and the parties will this will obviously get discussed, but before the 50-year lease end, because whoever owns the building may want to end up owning the land under it, also reunite the estate, and the landlord's goals may be different at that time.
So I guess, and that's really what I'm getting to, is that I think it's really important to, with all these things, yes, we know that it will be different people dealing with it then, but I think it's important to leave breadcrumbs of what the stewardship intention is now for those people to not miss it, know to, have a trigger to look at this again. And not wanting to bind the hands of the future board, but to give them some idea of what the thinking was by us now, about affordable housing on the site, and since this is what it is now, to be intentional about that being the primary goal here, that if it can remain, or something like that. I just wanted to kind of see what others feel about. Because otherwise it's just like, yes, the ground lease is gone, but you can always record longer covenants.
Well, they're different. You're dealing with two completely different issues here, right? One is the lease of the ground.
Right.
The other is the financing that's going into the building.
Right.
Contains a use restriction. So when we get the building back, we will get it subject to that use restriction.
Which includes the restriction.
Which is the lure that it's gotta
Right.
stay.
But that too, I mean, the point is, those are still time limited to 60 or something. So it's about idea of extending that beyond those current restrictions. I think I'm just asking first not to leave it as a completely open-ended negotiation for the future selves.
Why?
Because
what if the market is completely different here now and that's a great spaceship landing port or?
no, I'm not saying locking it in. I'm saying just sharing that, like,
Okay.
that is a goal that if it does make sense in the market. This is ULC hat on.
Yeah.
This is about making sure that, there's an intention that this already is affordable housing. And if it does make sense to keep it as that, please consider extending this. But no, it's not restricting them to this is what it shall be. That's all. The other piece is, I just wanted to ask about, and maybe this is for Kimball as well, the realistic nature of this. I know it says estimate of 2 years to certificate of occupancy, and I'm curious about kind of really to true CO versus TCO, because sometimes there's a lot of other work that's happening post temporary certificate of occupancy to get to your certificate of occupancy. Obviously we're typically saying, okay, you get your tax credits and then you're closing on your financing a year after that. And then for a building of this size, you're building for about 18 months. So just in terms
What's
of
the
when the
reality?
board is understanding when the money's coming, 2 years feels, I'm like, really?
That feels like a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Kimball Krangle with Gorman and Company. It's great to be here today. Thanks for having us and thanks for the recommendation. So Aaron, or Commissioner, I'm not sure what to call you. Ms. Clark, thank you for that excellent question. We actually do have some funds capitalized in our construction budget to start those payments to the State Land Board at that 2-year time period from the date of essentially now. So we take that out to our close date on our financing, and that's when those payments would begin. So pre-CO, actually.
So I guess that's maybe the key question here, because we're saying, because lease execution is part of your financial closing, correct? Like that's when this is going onto the property. So I guess I'm just curious why we're tying it to CO.
We'd be happy to tie it to our financial closing.
That's just more in the land board and Gorman's control then. All right, that's all. Thanks.
Good. Any other questions, comments? All
Me.
right. Are you good?
I was seeing if Commissioner Frobe
I can see her
has
now.
our
It's, she's the tiny screen. It's really hard.
So I do have draft board order both in your packet and on PowerPoint. It's somewhat lengthy because there's a lot of bullets on the
We
terms.
need to real quickly do, you can put it up,
Public
but we
comment.
also have to do public comment.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. It takes a village. A lot of people have to help me with that. All right, with that, let's go ahead and open this up to public comment, Nick, if there's anyone who would like to join us.
What'd you say? Folks listening along, if you have comments for this agenda item for the commissioners, use the raise hand feature and we'll bring you forward.
With the amendment that you suggested, so it's a financial closing. Do you want to do the? We have no public comment.
No hands raised.
There's actually a board order too. So
I have a question about the board order.
Okay.
In light of Commissioner Clark's comments, about, like the future or whatever. So, are we looking at the board order as it's presented, and Commissioner Clark's comments were just for information? Or, and by the way, I appreciate them, and I don't feel the need to have those. So for myself, I would be considering a motion for the board order as presented in the packet. But so anyway, point of clarification, Chair.
I think we have an agreement to change it to financial closing.
2 years from.
Yes,
Annual payments beginning within
Exactly.
2 years of the.
yes,
financial closing.
you could fix that. I'm agnostic, to be honest with you, with regard to future kind of intent. But I'm open to. Any other?
I'd kind of like to leave some flexibility. In 50 years, whether it's the spaceport or the.
And we may not need affordable housing. Something else is taking the place of that, and everything's great. We can only wish. Are you comfortable with that?
I am, yeah, none of this is, my comments are not to hamstring anybody. I mean, we can say that the intention is clear because this is what we've set it up as now.
Yeah.
I think it's really just trying to get to, and I'll just state it on the record, so it'll be in terms of how that we know that we can only go as long as 60 years as an affordability period right now. So if that would be appropriate in the future, that it could be extended, if that is appropriate on the site, then that would be great to consider. But again, none of this is that was what it has to be. We set these up regularly for exactly that. We don't know what the market will be, and don't want to hamstring that, but these deals are so hard to put together in the first place. And so, and I have yet to see any time in the history of the country that affordable housing is.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's
Fair
the one real estate need that never changes.
Never goes
The top of the market fluctuates, the bottom does not.
So my wishful thinking maybe is probably grounded in reality.
Considering the federal housing authorities were created back in 1938.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
I see your point. All right, with that dialogue noted, Commissioner Clark, are you comfortable changing this board order to reflect some of your comments with regard to the terms?
Only that third bullet point, I think.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But we have to say that, correct?
Okay, so you want me to make a motion then? Is that what you're saying?
I think we do.
Yeah, well, again, always the board order is most critical, so we know what to do after.
Right.
The more actually fleshing out the third the change to the third bullet point, to the degree that we can do that here today, the best practice.
Would it be easier if I read it and you all approve what I said, or?
Just the third bullet.
There is a draft in the packet that we could say, the draft in the packet with the.
Change
That's what I was gonna say, yeah, just.
I think you can say that. I just think we need to be very clear
I
about
was
what
going-
the change to the third bullet.
Right, so I'm prepared to say that precise language for, so I propose, or. I thank you. I move, to approve the board order for the Ninth and Grant Housing ground lease as presented in our packet with, the following revision to the third bullet point, so that it reads that annual payments begin within 2 years of lease execution.
Second.
Is that
Is-
five?
Well, when I heard the discussion, there was a trigger with.
Lease
close-
execution occurs with the.
With the.
Financial closing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's.
That was-
Okay. Does that pass?
I think so.
Okay, very good. And the second was Commissioner Heath. Let us call a vote. Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Commissioner Heath,
Yes.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Fro,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. Thanks much, Chris.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. All right, we are now to the Colorado State Forest Annual Work Plan.
Jared Smith is joining us remotely. Jared, it's your show when you're ready.
Okay. Let me get.
Oh, can hear ya.
We can hear you, we cannot see you.
Okay.
There you
are.
That.
I was actually looking for you in the room, so it's good to see you on the screen.
All right, let's see if I can do this correctly.
Okay.
How does that look?
Perfect.
Very
Perfect?
good.
Wow.
Yep.
I don't hear that very often. All right. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Jared Smith, Northwest District Manager. I'm here today to present the 2024 Colorado State Forest Annual Work Plans. Why is this important? The annual work plans that we go through every year for the Colorado State Forest is the main objective is coordination with the lessees and stakeholders that are on the property and operate in the area. This is required to achieve, optimal outcomes for both the lessees and the state land board on this property. The Colorado State Forest, it's located on the eastern edge of Jackson County and the western edge of Larimer County. As you can see this, let me get forgot the laser pointer. Okay, here we go. So as you can see, this is the large property here is the Colorado State Forest that we're speaking about. Here's a close-up view of the property. This contiguous property, it's a little over 70,000 acres in size. As mentioned earlier, there are multiple lessees that lease the property, includes grazing, recreation, and forestry. Those are the main uses. There are also minor uses such as tower sites, county roads, power lines. When we're looking at the property on the ground, if some of the commissioners remember, this is on the very north end is the North Sand Hills. We have our Sherman Creek Ranch. It's located still up on the north end. Okay, here's Walden, just for a point of reference. Moving all the way down to the southern edge. Here's the Moose Visitor Center, which is a popular meeting area for the public and the state land board. CPW. Their headquarters are located at this site. And then in this area is the North Park Campground, which was the old KOA. This is the main entrance to a majority of the state forest, state park. So again, there's a lot of uses occurring on the property. And I forgot to mention, this was the first property for the State Land Board where multiple use was really applied between the forestry, the grazing, and the recreation. The property was formed back in the 30s. It was pieced together from end holdings from across the state that the land board had within national forest. And so the land board traded out our end holdings within the national forest for this property. So what are the purpose of the annual work plans? The three main points are to coordinate again with the individual lessees and what they have ongoing on the property, to help us all plan collaboratively. There are some projects that it makes sense for stakeholders or other lessees to work together on versus just doing individual work. And finally, it's for staff and the board to review and approve the upcoming plans for all of the lessees. So I'll speak a little bit about the plan development process. This plan was put in place. It began in the mid to late 90s, and it was essentially codified in the management plan for the property in 2001. Through that management plan, the staff was required to present these plans to the board for review. I go into more depth in the cover sheet, but the original process for plan development and review is a lot more rigorous at the beginning. So the current setup of the plan development is that the agencies review their current plans, their ongoing plans, as well as what they are wanting to do in the future. This includes Jackson County, Road and Bridge, as well as the commissioners, the lessees on the state forest, as well as the State Land Board. The State Land Board staff compiles work plans. We distribute them to all the stakeholders and lessees to review other people's plans. The working group, which is, again, it's Jackson County, it's the stakeholders, State Land Board, all the lessees meet together to review the plans in person, make comments, ask questions, create a final draft, and then that final draft is presented to the board for review and approval. So in the past, when this was first formed, there was a second review board that was compiled of community members in Jackson County to review the plans before they made it to the board for final review. We also had to put notices in the newspapers in Jackson County and Larimer County for public comment. Those had to run for 4 weeks. In the past, we've slowly pared down those requirements just because the review process was set up based on some proposed uses in the mid-90s on the state forest that were pretty controversial. It included a ski area being developed on the property. So once those uses were proposed, there was a lot of public outcry regarding the uses that were occurring on the state forest. They wanted input, they wanted to review what was being proposed or what was happening. And that's really the reason that this all originated. I've been with the land board for 11 years. We've never received any public comments since I've been doing this process. So again, we've kind of pulled back some of those requirements, especially the 4-week public comment period that was useful in the beginning, but without any large scale uses being proposed that may be controversial for the public. We haven't had any comments that have been submitted in the past, I think, 10 years. Just to review some of the 2023 accomplishments from last year, CPW had completed some renovations to 2 different campgrounds on the State Forest State Park. That was the Crags and Canadian River campgrounds. That the amount that they put in to the renovations was just over $320,000. This improved camping amenities and decreased resource damage to areas surrounding these campgrounds. Mr. Lovell earlier in the morning did mention the Up There timber sale. The Colorado State Forest had completed 2 different portions of timber sales on the state forest in the last year. That includes the Up There and the Gold Crest timber sales, which totaled just under 640 acres that were treated of timber. This work increased visitor safety by reducing the likelihood of dead timber falling across forest roads and trails. It also helps increase the undergrowth in these areas to get rid of old timber growth and diversify the forest stands in these areas. The last highlight would be the Sand Creek crossing for an OHV trail was improved. And this crossing is important because it connects a county road on the north end of the state forest to the North Sand Hills. This road goes through the State Forest State Park. So CPW has been working on improving this creek crossing for use, just because it's in the past, it was not really an established trail. The public was running through with ATVs, OHVs, and they were pushing sand into the creek. There was a lot of issues that were raised from private landowners down creek. So we had closed that trail in the past to help manage the use. And so with this crossing being improved, there's a loop that the public likes to use when they're visiting the State Forest State Park in that area. And this will help connect everything. And looking forward to the 2024 work plans, I did just speak a little bit about the North Sand Hills. This is an ongoing, I think this is an ongoing project for the State Land Board as well as the BLM, CPW and Jackson County. The North Sand Hills has a tremendous amount of recreation that occurs every year. A lot of the camping is in areas that are not designated for camping. So largely Abe Medina, our recreation manager, has been working with the recreation group with the BLM to try and establish trail systems, camping areas that the public can utilize to where we're limiting resource damage and trespass in the area. The North Park Campground, I know a lot of the board members have visited this site. This is an ongoing project with CPW. This is the site of the old KOA campground. CPW took this over probably 5 years ago, and they've been working on getting all the infrastructure up to code. They've installed a new bathhouse with showers and a restroom facility. The original KOA building, CPW was looking at keeping that as kind of the main building that the public would see when they came into the park. Due to a lot of structural issues, they ended up pulling that building down and are looking at developing something new. So This is, again, it's ongoing. There are some sites that have been opened up for the public. But the, CPW staff has been working hard on getting this site back to 100% for public use. Finally, timber health and fire mitigation. The Colorado State Forests has a number of projects occurring on the Colorado State Forest. Mr. Lovell mentioned again earlier in the morning a project that involves the Michigan River Ditch that the city of Fort Collins owns. They've contacted the Colorado State Forest Service to do some timber management in that area, just to ensure that if a fire does occur, that it won't cause damage to the ditch and affect the water supply that the city of Fort Collins is utilizing. With that being said, I do have two recommendations for the board. The first is that staff recommends the board approve the 2024 annual work plans for the Colorado State Forest. The second recommendation is that staff recommends the board delegate review and approval authority to staff for future Colorado State Forest annual work plans beginning in 2025. The second recommendation and board order was discussed in-house with Greg Okish, the prior assistant director. He believed that presenting, the requirement for staff to present this to the board every year was not necessary with the current projects that are being worked on the property. He thought that it was appropriate for staff to retain our current process in reviewing and approving the plans with the lessees and the stakeholders, and then include this as on the staff report for the board meeting. So it would still come through the annual board meeting. It would just not be a standalone presentation for the board to review and approve. With that being said, are there any questions, comments from the board?
I just had a quick question. Are most work plans is this the only work plan that we do this with? I guess is
that comes to the board.
Comes to the board with the whole to be approved. I'm just curious.
I believe the answer to that is yes. We do this sort of thing on other properties. The Lowry Ranch comes to mind, where we've got 19 lessees we need to coordinate, and we don't bring that to the board. I think this was more a function of us needing to build some credibility and transparency in that part of the state following the proposed ski area in the late 90s. And, some of the stuff that went on up there in the 90s, I think may have led to Amendment 16, frankly. Ed may disagree with me, but I think some of this was us just trying to be more public and transparent up there. And I think, things sunset, boards change, the community needs change. I think what you've heard from Jared is the community sort of voted with their feet on this one. Nobody's ever commented in 10 years. We've achieved our goals up there maybe. And I don't know that the board needs to continue to approve this. So that's what we were recommending.
And one addition to what Commissioner Ryan was saying is it's a common talking point. We've heard that Governor Bill Owens at the time, he received more letters from the public about the proposed ski area on the Colorado State Forest than any other issue that occurred during his time as governor.
It was Romer. Yeah, but your point is right. Wrong governor.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember if it was Romer or Owens.
Report says
That is Commissioner Thomas. I just had one question in regard to the future. You know, the 2025 beyond, where staff would review and approve. I take it on our expenditure side, I mean, I guess we're not really spending this as partners that are putting up the money. So as long as we knew what that'd be I&D funds over what 75,000. So that was my one concern.
Commissioner Heath?
Justin, when we were up there, there was a lot of conversation around the safety and law enforcement issues. That you and others mentioned. Has that been resolved?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing on that. Can you?
Okay, and this is Commissioner Heath, and when we visited up there, there was a conversation about how many people came and created safety issues, and that there was not adequate law enforcement to deal with the problems that were up there. Is that issue been resolved?
To my knowledge, they haven't added any more capacity for their law enforcement. And I think it is a county issue in terms of the sheriff's office is understaffed, and CPW I think they only have a few on staff that qualify as law enforcement. And that again, it comes to the management of the North Sandhills that always requires a lot of law enforcement staff. Typically, the BLM will bring in law enforcement officers from other states during those high volume weekends just to help with that. But I guess to answer your question, currently, no, I don't think that's been resolved.
Commissioner, I just want to clarify also that the parcel you're talking about is the North Sandhills.
Right.
And that's different from the state forest working plan that we're talking about here. They are adjacent to one another. Also, there is an intergovernmental working agreement between the parties up there. But I don't know the answer to your question. Jared's closer to whether anyone else has hired more law enforcement. I think, as he said, what I've heard is they bring in outside forces on the big 3-day weekends when they're, and BLM has made more of an effort to try and control it. But as to whether or not it's gotten better, I don't know. There've also been some discussions about transfers of parcels up there. Again, those things often take years and years and years to ever come to fruition. But if we can be part of a solution in that way, I think we're open to it.
Well, I know just when I was up there, several people just when we were off and you kind of tugged at you when you were in the restaurant or someplace, said, this is really, man, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And so it felt like, I don't know what the remedies are. Of course, no one ever has enough money or enough resources, but is there any additional fee that can be put in place?
That would be a BLM or CPW thing, not an us thing.
And then I guess I would sort of say on your recommendation about just having staff approve it, it's a very large piece of land. And I feel like it's helpful for us to know about it. And while on staff reports, there are certainly a number of things you go through, but I like having it in the packet and having a sense about what's being done there. So that's one view.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
I would just add that DNR and CPW have been having ongoing conversations with the BLM up there around potential solutions to having the state assist with enforcement and addressing some of the concerns around resource damage. Team up with a recent CPW commission meeting as well on concerns, like I said, prayer funds. And something that we're working on. Continuing to have conversations.
Yeah, I know one of the waitresses actually said to me, it's dangerous up there. It's not doing anything.
To Josie's discussion point, how do folks feel about shifting this away from an action item to a staff report?
This is Commissioner Frobe. I actually felt like it was a well-conceived suggestion and I agree with it. I think while interesting and we can receive it, but to take up time in a board meeting for the amount of detail for all these work plans and projects, I just feel like I agree with the suggestion.
Which is part of you agree with the idea of taking this off of,
Yes, delegating it to staff, the approval of the
Yeah.
individual work plans associated with.
okay,
And particularly since it's other funds, it's not our funds. Those partners are coming in, thoughtful partners.
yes, Mindy.
This is Mindy Gottsegen, Conservation Services Manager. Your question a few minutes ago about what other plans did we have?
Yeah.
The board approved a similar plan for the statewide state forest plan for all the properties around the state except for the Forest Service until about 3 years ago. And at that point, the board delegated that to staff. Currently, Assistant Director Hoyt signs that agreement. We don't actually necessarily put that in the staff report, but that's an annual thing that happens. It used to come to you every March, I think, and we would do a kind of a similar presentation. And I do believe the idea was to do this also for the State Forest Service, for the state forest property.
Okay, that's helpful.
I was thinking of it in terms of assets and you're exactly right. Yep, thanks.
Josie, do you feel strongly about this?
I'm not going to mad on this.
You're not going to ban, okay, all right. No, I think that's good conversation though, because it is a change. I thought it was because we like seeing Jared, but.
I like learning about Agnes Creek Cabin.
Yeah.
Right, I'd like to.
I think we should just keep it on our board tours, to be honest with you, on kind of a routine schedule. Every few years go up there. Because
I agree with that.
Yeah, far more meaningful to see it live. All right, with that, Jared does have a recommendation for us that we would need a motion. Oh, yeah, public comment, if we're done.
Sounds like we are.
I was just going with Jared's history of 11 years of no comment, so if that holds.
Folks in the public, if you're listening along, want to make a comment on this item, and we're guessing you don't, please use the raise hand feature. We'll bring you to the fore.
I was gonna say, don't.
Yeah.
It does not look like we're having any comments.
Jared's record holds. Okay, with that, we do have, we will need a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board adopt the Colorado State Forest Annual Rate Plan that is shown in the packet of March 13th.
Second. All right.
I'll second. Oh, sorry.
Commissioner Clark second. We'll call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Frobe.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That motion passes 5-0. Thanks a lot for joining us, Jared.
Thank you.
There's
Yeah.
two motions. So the
Oh.
second one was that
Oh,
we don't
we also-
bring it to you in the future.
Yes, we approve the plan, but we need the motion not to bring it to change, because that's, I'm guessing that's in policy. Is it? Or is it just something we've done?
It was,
I think it's identified in the.
Agreement.
It's in the, okay, that's where it's located. All right, so we will need a motion to make that change.
I will move that the board approve the action presented in our board order to delegate the review and approval of the Colorado State annual work plans to staff beginning in 2025.
All right, and second, Commissioner Chavez, we'll call another quick vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
Commissioner Frobe.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so both of those pass. Thank you. All right,
you,
we are.
Commissioners.
Thank you. Thanks for not driving to Denver today, probably. All right, we are on to oil and gas, Katie.
Sorry.
Click on the screen and then you can use whatever controls you want.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, commissioners. Katie Stitt, Oil and Gas Leasing Manager, and today I'm bringing forward the standard list for the April 2024 oil and gas lease auction. So as governments across the globe are moving towards transitioning our energy economy to greener sources, both the U.S. Energy Information Administration and other international agencies believe that oil and gas will continue to be part of that conversation through 2050, if not beyond. Colorado, having some of the most strict, if not the strictest, oil and gas regulations, will play a critical role in ensuring that the oil and gas that's produced to meet the energy needs is produced in the cleanest and safest way possible. So leasing does not guarantee development. And this list is an excellent example of that, as all of these tracks are in front of you today because they were previously leased and nothing happened. But it is the first step in a long process that can result in the development of a necessary energy resource. So today I'm bringing forward 9 tracts. They contain about 5,400 acres, and they're the reddish orangish dots that you see on the map. They're located in Adams, Cheyenne, and Weld County, which are outlined in the blue and shaded in the top center and the far right of your map. As I mentioned, all of these tracts have been leased for oil and gas within the last 10 years, 6 of them as recently within the last 5. For the tracts in Weld and Adams County, operators are actively working in these areas. And in Cheyenne County, where the nominations are more explored. But the operators there are looking for helium. And through some of our conversations in the past, we've talked a little bit about helium and how that development works, comparing it to typical oil and gas development. But helium is an inert, non-toxic gas, and it serves critical roles in various industries, including cryogenics, superconductive magnet cooling, and my favorite example of that is your MRI scanners. Welding uses helium and various uses in the aviation industry. And Cheyenne County does have historic production of helium gas. So these tracts will be offered at the board's standard 20% royalty rate, with the exception of the one parcel I pointed out in our cover sheet. And that's term sheet 2996. It's the tract located in Adams County. As I summed up in the cover sheet, this property is somewhat unique in that it used to have a long-term non-development lease on it. Back in I should know the date, I think it was 2011, but it could be 2012. There was a negotiation done between the holder of that LT agreement to allow oil and gas development on that property. And as part of that, there was a perpetual overriding royalty interest put on it at 3%. So in order to make sure that the board gets the full 20% royalty rate, we're going to put that out to auction at the 23% royalty rate, and then we'll take care of making sure all the parties and documentation is done appropriately. So this auction is going to open on energynet.com on Thursday, April 11th, and it will close the following Thursday on the 18th. And as I detailed in the cover sheet, all of the tracts were reviewed per the board's policy. Staff has recommended specific stipulations as outlined on Exhibit 2 to your cover sheet. And I wanted to just note for the record, we had inadvertently put the wrong Exhibit 2 in the first publication of the board's cover sheet. So if anybody reviewed it, like the very first day it was published, that was not the right version. So that was my bad. We got it corrected. So hopefully people are looking at the most current version, which has all of the CPW concerns notated on it and how we're addressing those with the stipulations. All of those stipulations are recommendations that the board has seen before, but if you have any questions on any of them, I'm happy to chat. So with that, staff is recommending that the board approve the standard list for auction and lease with the 9 tracts covering 5,400 acres more or less, including the stipulations noted on Exhibit 2. I would be happy to take questions or comments. I do know that we had a public comment letter that I hope
we did receive that. Thank you. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
I have
I
one.
am
Commissioner Probe has her hand up.
Commissioner Probe, her tiny hand.
This might be redundant, but just even having read through the materials, Katie, just confirming that these leases have followed our normal processes according to policy and have been reviewed by the relevant agencies and stipulations and actions recommended by those agencies and the normal stipulations we have for particular protections of species and habitat have all been followed. In other words, there's no sort of exception in this package of leases for auction.
Yep, the short answer is yes. In detail, staff, the district managers, conservation services manager, stewardship trust manager, and all of our other business line managers reviewed these tracks. In addition to getting external comments from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we send these out to local government designees. These are folks that are registered with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. So they're not signed up with us, they're signed up with the ECMC. But they get notice of any potential oil and gas activity in their counties. We provide them an opportunity to comment. City of Aurora did take the opportunity to provide their comments to us, which was included in your packet. And we also send the list to Denver Water for their comments as well. So any responses I included in the packet, I didn't include staff's individual comments because those are summed up in Exhibit 2 on the stipulations we recommend. So short answer is yes. That was the longer answer. So it has gone.
Okay. Thanks for both of those.
All right, I don't see any other commissioners comments, so open this for public comment.
Folks listening along online, please use the raise hand feature to make comments on this item to the commissioners. Just acknowledging once again that, and we mentioned at the top of the item and the top of the meeting, that we received a written public comment in the form of a letter. Mr. Nichols was identified in that letter as going to be addressing the board, and he is here as panelist, and we can see you in the room. And I think we'll turn it over to Mr. Nichols for his comments.
Welcome.
Great, thank you, commissioners. Good morning. Really appreciate the opportunity to comment. Just wanted to flag the letter that was submitted by a coalition of organizations, including the Center for Biological Diversity, which is the organization I work for. I'm a senior advocate with the Center for Biological Diversity. A number of organizations in Colorado with thousands of members in Colorado just wanted to flag our concerns that more oil and gas leasing is not consistent with the need to confront the climate crisis. And we want to urge the commissioners to begin to recognize the need to align land board decision-making with the need to to confront the climate crisis. We are urging you to reject the staff recommendation that you move forward with this proposed leasing. We are very concerned that we're not dealing with a complete balance sheet here, that while there may be some revenue from oil and gas, that the true costs of future oil and gas development have not been accounted for. We urge you to reject this current proposal, but looking ahead and moving forward, we really want to urge you to ensure that that balance sheet is completed moving forward and that there is full recognition of the true costs of more oil and gas development, not only in terms of the climate impacts, but air quality and fish and wildlife and habitat impacts. We appreciate the opportunity to comment, just wanted to flag that, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or if there's anything else you would like, I'm here.
Great. Are there any questions? No. We do appreciate you and your group's thoughtful comments, and certainly we are always aware of these issues, and I want to express that we also care about these things. We just balance this also with a fiduciary duty, which I'm sure you understand. And as people who are not regulators or permitters, you know, our job is to just approve these leases as they come to us. So, but don't want to diminish your comments in any way with our role. All right, is there anyone
Thank you.
else for? Yep, thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment, Nick?
Anyone else online? Use the raise hand feature. Does not appear. We've got an additional comment.
Thank you. We will need a motion if we can to approve the leasing agendas supported by Katie.
Commissioner Thomas, I move we approve the oil and gas leases option for April 2024. That's presented.
Thank you. And a second? I will second the motion. We will call a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Probe?
Commissioner Frobe.
Oh, did you freeze? There you are.
Sorry. Yes, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
And the chair votes yes, that passes 5-0. Thank you, Katie.
Okay.
All right, Ben? Yes.
Well, you just,
Oh, Elliot, I skipped right over you. I didn't flip my page well enough.
It's on my slide over, you get through that.
Yeah.
Morning again, Elliot Boyd, Assistant Director, Sustainability Working Plans. We have for you today as an action item now, Lowry Ranch Cooperative Planning Agreement. You remember that last month we had a presentation from 3 of the partners involved in the existing agreement that we have, planning agreement. That is expiring soon, and so we're bringing it back to you for the potential for a renewal. So the purpose of the agreement, the cooperative planning agreement, is planning for the future of Lowry Ranch. And so we've talked a little bit about that earlier today, and we'll talk about it some more here. We believe that this partnership will help us to get a more comprehensive view of what the options are for the future of the ranch. You will remember Lowry Ranch is in Arapahoe County. And again, its location at the edge of the Denver-Aurora metro area is a large part of why it's such a valuable asset for us and for the community. Reminder, the partners that we're currently working with are Arapahoe County Open Space, the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, and Great Outdoors Colorado. The existing agreement with planning partners expires in May of 2024, which is why we're bringing this to you now. The renewal of the agreement, we've discussed with the partners. They have asked for another 3 years. The original term was 3 years. They've asked for another 3 years because of the complexity of the work that needs to be done. And part of the agreement requires that we work collaboratively with those partners to towards mutually agreed upon goals. And just to speak for a minute, it's in the documentation that you read in your board packet, but just wanted to say for a moment that the goals include conservation values. So the focus is on the primary and secondary natural value areas that were part of the Lowry Ranch 2050 stewardship framework. So that sort of was an impetus for this agreement, an arrangement for planning for the future. The recreational values, that's something that is certainly of strong interest to Arapahoe County Open Space. They've been looking at various trail systems and so forth that are adjacent to, approximate to the property. And so that's part of the conversations that we've been having with them. As part of this work, it would be necessary to do appraisals. And as you can imagine, appraising this property and all of the different values it has and assets is complex. And so the planning group is taking on some of that to help all of us understand the value of the property. The goals for Lowry Ranch involve spending money. And so whether it's us spending money or partners spending money because of activities or initiatives that would happen there, it requires aligning. And so that is a complicated process and requires some time to to think about public and private funding sources that might be necessary. And then one of the goals is communication. So we have agreed to, in conjunction with the partners, be aligned in the way that we talk about what this corporate plan is. So that's a very short presentation of it. You have in your packet, it was exhibit 1 as part of the packet, the actual draft of the proposed agreement. It's based very strongly on the original with slight tweaks depending on, there are a couple of people whose names have changed, including my own, on that document and a couple of other entities, but really it's a continuation of what has been the agreement we had, but I would open it up for questions about that or anything else that's related to this topic.
This Commissioner Chavez, I'm in agreement with pretty much, the planning, the discussions. I don't understand or know what I'm in favor of the last paragraph in section 2, where the parties believe fee acquisition is the best way. That's the whole point of this, is to figure out, is that the best way? But we're just throwing it out there. I just don't feel comfortable with that. Personally.
Yeah, understood. And again, that was in the 2021 document, which you're bringing up now. It's a very valid point as we go back and look at these agreements is the right language for it. So noted, I guess, one of the things that I want to take away from this document has been reviewed by the other partners, and all of their entities said that it looked okay to them. I explained to them that it had not been fully reviewed by this board. And so that my purpose is to come to you and to get the comments. And then if what I hear here is that I should go back to the partners and say, that's great, we have XYZ amendments, then I'm happy to do that. So.
I'm not sure the sentence is. Well, let me say, I think the intent was, to the extent that folks decide that a portion of this should be conserved, selling it would be a better option than putting an easement on it and us holding it. I think we wouldn't be interested in that, but is your point that until we decide what ought to be preserved and what the goals of the plan are, we shouldn't commit that that's the path?
I think Aaron, yeah, or Commissioner Pro, she knows a lot about these. I'd like to hear her comment.
I don't think that this is so much, I think I'm not troubled by it because I feel like it's, these are all sort of general intent and objectives, and conservation is the interest of the parties with whom we're engaged here, and they're doing a lot of work to try and understand what the conservation options are. And as we know in our Lowry plan and stewardship plan and all the other associated efforts over the last 10 years, I think most parties to this agree that there is a conservation component. So I'm not troubled that I don't feel at all that we're bound or that this is driving us to do anything in the language here, but I'm open to making changes if others feel strongly.
I actually do strongly agree with Commissioner Chavez here in that LOIs are non-binding, we understand that, but it does happen that we're going through things quickly and something like this does get pulled and put into what does become binding. And I think that this is too declarative a statement about our intention now. So yes, we understand what the parties intend, other things, the word conservation is here, but this I think is too strongly in, like you said, the best way to do this is to tell it. And yes, there would be some conservation easements. And I think at this stage, yes, if we understand the intent of the parties to be something else, let it be that in the negotiations, but to remove this.
One point of clarification there, I would say too, is this I read and have read as that differentiation that the State Land Board does like to make in its own interest, which is we are much more interested in sales rather than in approving easements. And I looked at, the paragraph ahead of it is, this project is focused on multiple layers of economic and natural values, and we are simultaneously attempting to generate significant income from all the diverse compatible uses. So again, I'm happy to change it. I just wanted to illuminate a little bit more.
And I hear that as well. I think the point being, this is not a bilateral agreement. It's not just the landlord. This is saying all of the parties. These are statements for everyone. And to the extent that what you just read, Deb, is more consistent with the goal of all the parties, that then in the interest of not having anything be ambiguous or internally inconsistent, let's lean on that language and not confuse it with
Well,
this.
is there something like change best way to one way? I think I'm asking you, but I think we agree that it is obviously something that this board has approved in the past, that there are times when we would actually sell a piece of property to be placed into conservation easement. So, but I agree that saying best way is a very directive statement, right?
And did you want to?
Well, I was just trying to get some guidance on what language would be acceptable. First thought that leapt to my mind is just changing is to maybe the best way. Elliot's suggestion is another way, and I think either, to my ear, balances Commissioner Frobe's discussion about there really is something of a preference to a fee transaction, or at least there has been. However, balancing that with the concern of, but we don't need to be that declarative right now. And so I think either of those, to my ear, sound okay. I'm just looking for some guidance on what we propose back to the other folks in a way that doesn't bring too much concern with them that we're redrafting.
But today, all we have is this letter. I mean, there's planning, there's meetings, there's years of study. I just don't see it necessary.
Can we do? I'm
Well,
looking at this as a mandatory versus permissive.
Oh, it's some language.
Would you be
Yeah,
okay with maybe a way?
Yeah.
To achieve these goals?
We can also do we can also suggest a language that is, that doesn't involve directing, just the parties will explore the options of fee transfer, conservation easement.
Yeah, I know, exploring, yeah.
So if we don't wordsmith it here, but we just have a motion that's saying that we are.
Otherwise, they just say you explore the options.
Right.
I think what I'm looking for is to know what language it doesn't have to be precise wordsmithing. But I'd like Elliot and us to have a idea of what's acceptable, or whether you would like us to bring it back to you to see the revisions. Which is obviously possible. We've got some time, April meeting, we can do that. I just don't want to abuse the commissioner's time as we wordsmith this. So trying to get a feel for what is comfortable for all 5 commissioners, if we can adjust this and move forward. Or however the commissioners want to proceed.
If I may, from that perspective, Commissioner Chair, I think I would be comfortable with it not coming back to us necessarily, but I think the issues are is and best way, where is feels like would have in a contract a will versus a may. So if we're not declaring that this is and is the only or is the best option.
Commissioner Frobe is weighing into.
So maybe if, I think what we're all saying is, let's make a change in this language and then move to a board motion where we're approving the entering into this agreement with a change to the language. And I wonder if we could say, the parties intend to explore fee title acquisition of all or part of the ranch property to achieve these goals, as well as conservation easements as additional options where fee transactions aren't possible.
Would you be willing to just say options rather than delineating all those?
Sure, explore options for fee title acquisition or other structures or
So that's
We're
right.
at the group writing phase now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
either we're, I think if we can just say, this is the broad strokes of what we're trying to get to and leave it to the staff to come up with the wording, because otherwise we are needing to write something out very specific and have that be the motion. And I think that's what we're trying not to do at this point in the meeting.
Well, it's up to you guys. I
would
just,
prefer not to.
I just want to be, you know, as always, I'm trying to help staff know how to implement the concepts that are discussed. I think Elliot and our office can help draft to meet your goals. And then sort of the question is, would you like to see the document again before, or would you like us to go ahead and present it to the other side? And if it meets what we understand your goals are, to move forward, unless the other side has greater changes that they'd like to make.
Is it worthwhile just to take it all out?
That's why I just wondered the same thing, because it's going to be part of the dialogue regardless.
Yeah.
We can
That
suggest
works
that.
too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner Fogue. I'm happy to suggest that. I think that we will, and I apologize, the other parties had offered to be available. I wasn't sure based on last month whether we're gonna be a deeper, so they could answer this. I'm guessing here, but from conversations that I had, there might be strong feelings that it at least be included as a
Reflected.
possibility,
Okay.
because they're gonna go pay for appraisals and things and fundraising and so forth. So I think that I know that there's an intention to make an offer at some point. We haven't obviously committed to anything,
I think.
but I think that my sense is
We're keeping it
in here because they wanted it in here
Yeah.
as an option. I agree that saying best way is maybe forcing our hand.
I've got some language written that
You fixed.
yeah.
Okay, do it.
Do you want me to read it?
Yep.
The- The parties intend to explore the fee title acquisition of one or of all or part of the Lowry Ranch property by the county. This is one way to achieve these goals with blah, 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 blah. So I only altered the first clause.
And I think that's accurate, that we do intend to explore it. Right?
And
As one
this
way.
is one way that we
So,
want to
Yeah.
make sure is noted.
And we want to
Okay,
get-
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner
so,
Crowe, good job.
Good job.
I just wrote fastest. You guys had the idea.
No scribe. It's been-
Well, good job.
And Chair, moving for motion.
Well, we have to open it to public comment. If we are finished with our discussion.
Folks listening along online, if you'd like to address the commissioners on this item, please use the raise hand feature and you'll have your opportunity to do that. And I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Terrific. All right, Commissioner Heath, you want to put forward a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the board order regarding the agreement with Arapahoe County, the Trust for Public Land Nature Conservancy in Great Falls, Colorado, on cooperative planning at the Lowry Ranch with the paragraph that Director Ryan has proposed. We delegate authorities. Right.
Can I offer one thing in terms of so you're going back to the other parties with this. Yes, we delegate to you to finalize this if this is accepted. If for some reason it is materially changed or pushed back on, I think we should then have that come back to us.
If they have an issue with how we change.
We would do that anyway.
Okay. Good point.
I'll second.
Okay, wonderful. Second, Commissioner Chavez. Let's call a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Fro?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, that passes by 0. Thanks, Elliot. All right, Ben, I've been waiting for you.
I'm not ready.
My apologies to Elliot for jumping the gun there. While we're getting set up, I enjoyed the grizzly bear discussion earlier. And on an inspection trip, I happened upon a roadside sign in Conejos County that talks about how the last grizzly bear in Colorado was in Conejos County and died in 1975.
79.
Yes.
That's
The
high.
hide and skull are in the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. If you care to
kidding.
find it. There you go. All right. Commissioners, and for the record, this is Ben Teschner, Solid Minerals Manager with the State Land Board. And I'm here to discuss Solid Minerals lease 102407 with Trapper Mining. And this is an extension of a royalty rate reduction originally approved 5 years ago. On the call also, we have representatives from the Trapper Mine led by Tonya Perkins, their senior mining engineer, if we have any questions. Oopsies, here we go. On a roll. All right. The goal of this item is to keep the state coal at Trapper competitive. And to kind of dive in a little bit here, this photo is of the Craig Station power plant just outside of Craig. And the coal from the Trapper mine feeds this power plant, and it is what we call a mine to mouth operation where there is one supplier and one consumer. If this item seems familiar, you may say this sounds an awful lot like something we did a year and a half ago. You'd be right. This is the 20-mile mine in neighboring Routt County, and you may remember that we did a similar royalty rate reduction extension at 20-mile for exactly the same reasons. And this one was approved by the board in October of 2022. So brief outline here, we're going to talk about the Trapper Coal lease briefly, coal and energy in Northwest Colorado, why we reduced this royalty rate to begin with 5 years ago, and then a staff recommendation to continue with this reduced rate. This lease is located in Northwest Colorado up at Moffett County. If we zoom in on this property, you can see my cursor here. This is the town of Craig, just to the north. And commissioners may remember from the board meeting we had in Craig, whenever we had that almost 2 years ago.
2022.
2022. When you're in Craig, you can sort of look south and see this property. The lease area is shown in yellow, and the Craig Station Power Plant shown here in the center of section 22. This is well visible from Craig. The board may also remember that you stood on this property, and here's a picture of the board and our staff at the Trapper mine on our visits.
This is not the Buffalo Run.
All right, so let's talk briefly about coal and energy in this part of the state and our state of Colorado more broadly. This is a photo again of the Craig Station power plant, and it's a little bit of a metaphor for what's happening with coal, but particularly coal for electricity generation in our state. You can see that at the time this photo was taken, only 2 of these units are operating, and the sun is setting right on this mode of electrical power generation. The other major power plant in this part of the world is the Hayden plant, which is in neighboring Routt County, only a few minutes away from Craig. And both of these plants are slated for closure. The 20-mile mine that was approved a year and a half ago for the same royalty rate reduction feeds the Hayden plant, which is scheduled to close in 2028. And at the time of our last presentation, the Craig Station plant was scheduled to close in 2030. That has since been moved up, and now that plant is scheduled to close in 2028. The effect of both of these plant closures is that the quantity of coal necessary to get from now to the closure of these plants is effectively fixed. That coal is going to be burned, and it's going to be mined from somewhere until those dates, at which point no additional coal will be necessary. All right, so let's talk about the justification for why we did this royalty rate reduction in the past. This is your on the left there, your friendly neighborhood district manager, Jared Smith. You said you liked to see him. There he is again. And our intern from a couple of years ago, Giselle. When Trapper originally asked for this royalty rate reduction, they cited a number of technical pieces about why the coal is more expensive to mine now than it had been in the past. They talked about a high strip ratio, which effectively means you've got to remove more material from the top in order to get to the coal. And also, especially in coal reclamation, take that material and put it back when you're done. The coal that they're after now is steeper dipping, so it's at a greater angle, which makes certain mining methods impractical and others more expensive. There are more rock partings in these deeper coal pieces. That's just means that in the package of coal that you're mining, there are sandstone layers and other things that are not coal that need to be washed out of that coal before it can be burned in the plant. And generally the coal that they're after at this point has a lower quality than the coal that they had mined before. And these are chemical impurities. So that coal needs to be blended more to meet the specifications of the plant. But those technical reasons alone probably wouldn't have been sufficient for this board to approve the royalty rate reduction at that time. The big reason is because we are in competition. Our coal is in competition with neighboring coal as to which of this coal is going to get mined and burned in the plant. And so you'll notice that this is the revenue from the past decade. And there's a long period here dating back to 2011 when no coal was mined on state land board property. And as a result, we received no royalty revenues for this mine. I'll note that I should have put an asterisk here, but this fiscal year is not over. This is year to date revenue, so we'll expect more in the coming months. But the Trapper asked for the BLM, who owns property adjacent to ours and which is part of this mine as well, to reduce their royalty to 8% in 2014. At that time, the BLM granted that rate reduction. And as you can see, since then, from that time, they did not go back to the more expensive state coal. They came to us and said, hey, we'd really like to go back to your coal, but could you grant us the same reduction that the BLM did? And the land board approved that reduction as well. And you'll see only 2 years later, they went back to the state coal.
Our lease, they had no obligation to mine, they could just let it ride.
Correct.
So much for the lease discussion.
Yeah. And so the BLM, as I said, was approving these surface coal mine royalty rate reductions at a number of mines, including Trapper, at about in that late 2000s, early 2010s kind of range. And this is an air photo showing the pit that is part of the Trapper mine, but not on our lease area. And so if you zoom in on that, you can see that's a large operation off of our lease area. Importantly, when mining takes place on any of our properties, but particularly at the Trapper Mine, reclamation takes place afterwards. And what we get after we mine a property is what you see here. This is a section of ground that I went out a couple of years ago on a bond release inspection with the inspectors from the Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety. And as you can see, we have mature vegetation here, and DRMS has repeatedly told me that the reclamation being done by Trapper is exemplary. And so we should take, I think, great comfort in that and be excited to partner with them going forward as this mine moves from an operating mine into a reclaimed mine and onto its next beneficial use in the future. So staff is making this recommendation that we continue this reduced royalty rate because we believe this meets our fiduciary obligations by keeping our coal competitive and hopefully encouraging Trapper to mine our coal through the end of the mine life. So staff is recommending the board extend the royalty rate reduction from 12.5% to 8% for the Trapper coal mining lease for an additional 5 years through April 2029. Here's the board order for your convenience.
Thank you, Ben. And we did, I want to acknowledge we received public comment on this as well. And clarify in my previous comments, I just want to make clear that we're not the permitters or the regulators. Not that we don't hold our own decision-making authority and review process as appropriate. Any comments or questions for Ben?
Commissioner Frobe.
Commissioner Frobe.
Hi, guys. Yes, Ben, so the rate reduction is proposed to go continue till 2029. I don't recall the termination of date of the lease, but what reclamation requirements when the plant is shut and no more coal is needed, what are the reclamation requirements associated with our lease?
Excellent question. This lease was signed, I should know this, but it's either in the 40s or the 50s, and we're still operating on that. So there are a few reclamation requirements in our lease. However, the reclamation requirements through the Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety are higher for coal than they are of all other commodities that we mine in this country. And that has to do with federal law. So though they will continue to be governed by those reclamation standards, part of which requires that their reclamation, that they wait a certain amount of time, and I believe that is 10 years past the date of mining to establish vegetation and things of that nature. So Trapper will be on this property for at least 10 years after the last coal comes out of the ground, doing that reclamation work and doing and monitoring that reclamation work, and eventually getting their bonds released as that process goes on. But those bonds are held by DRMS.
Got it.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, the actual power plant, will they tear that down also? I know it's not.
I don't know. Great question. I know this was the power plant and the sunsetting of coal is a topic that has come up repeatedly in Moffat County, but as an economic engine of Moffat County, and so there's a whole separate discussion around that transition. The commissioners may remember that from our local government roundtable report.
Certainly, and I think overall, as these fired power plants go offline, that has led us to increase our renewable portfolio as well. So we are to some of the same goals. All right, I don't see any other comments. Again, acknowledging the comment we received via letter on email. Nick, let's open it up to public.
Yeah, folks, members of the public, if you have a comment for the commissioners on this item, use that raise hand feature and we'll bring you up so that you can address the board. We do have one hand from Mr. Jeremy Nichols and no other hands showing.
Okay, welcome again.
Thank you, commissioners. Again, my name is Jeremy Nichols. I'm a senior advocate with the Center for Biological Diversity. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this particular agenda item. The letter that we submitted together with a coalition of other groups addressed both the oil and gas leasing agenda item and also this royalty rate reduction extension request. We do view these issues as very closely linked. This is about the land board addressing the true costs of opening the doors for more fossil fuel production. In this case, with the royalty rate reduction, we're very concerned not only around the climate and the environmental costs of more coal mining at the Trapper Mine, but also the fiduciary responsibility that this board has and how reducing the royalty rate will effectively subsidize a coal company at the expense of Coloradans. We're very concerned about the precedent that this sets. This is a coal mine with a single customer. It is very resilient in terms of economic challenges related to coal mining. The Craig Power Plant is not going to turn its back on the Trapper coal mine. It does not seem that the royalty rate reduction makes any economic sense in this case. And at the end of the day, all it's going to do is deny the opportunity for the state of Colorado to recover the money that it is due and that it's owed through this coal lease. So we urge you to deny the request. It does not make economic sense, and it for sure does not make environmental sense. So with that, I appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity to comment, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another hand raised. How do we pronounce Christara's last name?
I'm not sure we pronounced.
Because I have a friend that spells it that way and he pronounces it Michael. So
Christara is from Trapper Mine.
Panelist, give it a few seconds. And it looks like when you're ready, Christara.
Okay, I'm having some camera issues, but it looks like you can hear me. So I wanted to just thank Ben for his presentation and the staff for all of their work and the commissioners for their consideration and time.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, I have no other raised hands.
Okay, with that, we do have, if there is a motion to support this change, we do have a board order in our packet.
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move we approve Solid Minerals Lease 102407 royalty rate reduction extension as described in our.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. We will call a vote. Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
Commissioner Heath?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Frobe?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, that motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, I think we are now to our board leasing agenda for March. Mandy.
Commissioners. Andy Bissett, Transactions and Record Services Manager. We have the March 2024 board leasing agenda for you to review and approve. A full agenda this month with 11 items. We have 4 new leases, 2 ag to rec, and we have 7. Sorry, that was 4 competitive bids. 7 new leases, 1 ag, 2 rec, 3 right-of-ways, and 1 commercial lease. Happy to take any questions that I or staff could answer. And staff recommends approval of the March 2024 board leasing agenda.
You, any questions for Andy? I don't see any. Nick, let's go ahead and open it to public comment.
Folks in the public, raise that hand if you'd like to address the commissioners on this agenda item. And it looks like nobody's raising a hand.
Okay, we will need a motion to approve the board leasing agenda.
Sure. I move the board support board leasing agenda for March 2024 as shown in the packet.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Clark. We will call a vote. Commissioner Chavez.
Yes.
Commissioner Heath.
Yes.
Commissioner Clark.
Yes.
And Commissioner Probe.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, that passes 5-0. All right, we are down to minutes from our February board meeting. Did anyone have any changes to the minutes that they want to bring forward? I do not see any, so we will have the minutes approved by acclamation. I believe that is our meeting. Do you want to talk a little bit about April?
Preview for April?
Yes.
We'd originally talked about doing this in May, but we pushed it back to April to accommodate Commissioner Heath. So on Wednesday, and is that the 11th? Somebody, 10th, Wednesday the 10th. We'll meet here at 9:30, although Commissioners Clark and Heath, we're going to your neighborhood, so we'll meet you up there on site at Jack's Solar Garden. So the day is going to consist of two slightly different topics. One, agrivoltaics. And so we'll visit Jack's Solar Garden. Then we're going to stop for lunch somewhere and we'll have a couple of outside speakers who will also speak on that same topic. And then the afternoon, we're going to visit St. Vrain State Park. Abe's going to give a little bit of context about we have a parcel of land that's in that state park. And we have a beneficiary use agreement that Colorado Parks is the beneficiary of that trust, and they use the land as part of the park. So we've done similar agreements like that with Hesperus and other trusts where the beneficiary uses the land for their purposes. This is another one of those. That agreement comes up at the end of 24. And so this will give a little bit of context for discussions about that agreement later in the year. And then second, we're looking at doing a mitigation bank on property inside the park. Some of it's ours and some of it is CPW's. And so it's about a 150-acre mitigation bank that's being proposed. Mindy is going to lead that part of the tour. We'll talk with the mitigation bank operator. Commissioner Chavez, you'd asked for a little bit of background about the whole overall program and some of the deals. We'll talk about that. We'll do that on site at St. Vrain State Park. That should all wrap up 3:30 or 4. We'll take Commissioners Heath and Clark back to your cars at Jack's, and the rest of us will come back here. And then we'll have a regular board meeting on Thursday morning. And right now that looks like about a half-day board meeting, 8 to noon so far. So for planning purposes, it's a starting travel season in April, and then a half-day board meeting on Thursday.
Terrific. All right, cool. All right, everyone be safe.
Thank you all. We're
Whatever
adjourned.
might happen with the weather.
Yes.
We are
Please be safe.
adjourned.
If anybody wants to do something
Thank
else,
you. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Commissioner Frobe.
Commissioners, we do have lunch, but I don't care, that's why.